Chapter 1378. The ultimate martial realm's army was already divided into two groups, and after being assassinated by a group of supreme assassins, their pace was disrupted. Now that the Sky Martial Realm Supreme was pinned down and the two extreme pseudo-world weapons were attacking together, the ultimate martial realm's army finally understood how many experts were hiding near Desolation City. Boom! The city walls collapsed as the Snow Realm's army of 300,000 rushed into the enemy's ranks. The insane sex experts swarmed forward like a sharp knife stabbing into the enemy's heart, cooperating with the army to slaughter the ultimate martial realm's army. Supreme Empyrean Nangong Empyrean of the Supreme Sacred Ground, the first great demon god, and the first shaman god, these three were all supreme experts in the past with first-rate talents and resources. Now, they were like the sun in the sky, their Tao covered the sky as they worked together to turn into three bolts of lightning that messed up the sky. Empyrean Nangong was known as supreme, so naturally, he looked down on everything. His Tao was supreme, and his attacks were unstoppable. His supreme godly power was like a heavenly net that was extremely tyrannical. Those who came into contact with his godly power would have their bodies shattered and their blood splattered everywhere. Supreme Tao, boundless power, from the heart, break the heavens and earth. Boom! Empyrean Nangong used the Supreme Scripture's godly power. His movement technique was formless and traceless, blending into the Tao. A palm print formed in the void and fell from the sky, crushing space and time. It carried the power of heaven and earth as it rushed towards the 10 martial sovereigns, wanting to break through their alliance. The reason why the 10 martial sovereigns could easily kill the top assassins of Heavenly Hall was because they could indeed kill any supreme expert in an instant, including Yi Qinghan. Even with the feather spirit robe's protection, he would still be severely injured. Once their formation was broken, they would easily be surrounded by the insane sex people, turning their advantage into a disadvantage. Boom! Shirgu lifted the brick and turned into a bolt of lightning, cooperating with Empyrean Nangong. One swept down from the top and the other from the bottom, directly hitting the center of the 10 martial sovereigns. Bang! The power of the world and the unmatched divine power collided, the energy rushed into the starry river, shaking the 10 martial supreme experts until their chi and blood were in turmoil, almost breaking their formation. Just at this moment, the first-generation great demonic god's spear pierced through the clouds, demonic energy rushed into the heavens, black clouds covered the starry river. Boom! The spear shot diagonally towards the center of the battlefield from mid-air, coincidentally hitting the center of the 10 martial saints. The three forces collided, and the power increased by more than 10 times. Following that, the first-generation sorcerer mobilized 10,000 techniques and created 10,000 figures, all of them carrying attack power, attacking from all directions towards the center of the 10 martial saints, forcing the 10 martial saints to give up on the barrier. Kill! At Yi Qinghan's command, even Xue Jiuhuang rushed out. Hua! Yi Qinghan advanced with his saber in hand, killing one person with each strike. So what if they were the giant God Realm army? No one could withstand a single strike from him. With a single sweep of his saber, blood splattered in all directions. Dozens of giant gods were cut in half at the waist. The frigid ice elemental divine power destroyed the bodies of these experts. There were at least 30 experts in the Sky Treasure Forbidden Land. They were all working hard, hoping to control the pseudo-world weapon. Perhaps they could turn the situation around. However, when the pseudo-world weapon had a master, it was equivalent to 80% of the pseudo-world master's power. Even if they worked together, they could only suppress the pseudo-world weapon. Gu Qingyu couldn't retrieve the divine sword even if he wanted to. Both sides were in a deadlock. However, Gu Qingyu wasn't in a hurry. When Yi Qinghan mobilized the army to slaughter the army of 300,000, these experts would eventually fall. Boom! Hua! The might of the berserk sword could destroy the heavens and the earth. The blade light was dodged, and blood splattered across the river. The desolate city was covered in blood, and the smell was pungent. The 10 martial saints were scattered. They were gradually losing because there were too many experts in the insane sect. Just Nangong Tianzuan, the sorcerer god, and the demon god were stronger than the inner sect of the insane sect. Moreover, there were also Nangong Yunlan, Amo Li, Li Feng, Tong Tong, and Xian Yanxue. Swish. 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 Each of the 10 martial saints was surrounded by 2 or 3 people. It was fine if they were surrounded by the experts of the younger generation. However, if they were surrounded by Shirgu and the 3 supremes of the older generation, they were in trouble. One of the supremes was hit in the head by a brick and died on the spot. Xian Yanxue didn't deal with the 10 martial saints. Instead, he pulled out his sword and attacked the enemy group. He led the army to sweep through the enemy group. He was incomparably powerful. Every slash of his sword could kill people's souls. It was as if he didn't care about his life. Give up the pseudo-world weapon and counterattack. Ask for help. The Sky Martial Saint was suppressed by Xiaoye and Jiang Jingtian. He couldn't help. He could only roar and order the experts surrounding the pseudo-world weapon to give it up. He wanted to save the army that was being massacred. He wanted to fight to the death with the Snow World Army. The temptation of the pseudo-world weapon was too great. Unfortunately, when the experts of the Extreme Treasure Grounds left the pseudo-world weapon, they realized that they had been tricked. Hum. The pseudo-world weapon soared into the sky. At the same time, Gu Qingyu flipped in the air and grabbed the divine sword. Boom! Gu Qingyu, who was holding the pseudo-world weapon, was incomparably cold. He was like a peerless divine sword standing in the sky. He attacked the group of experts alone, blocking their way to help. Gu Qingyu completely gave up on resisting. He only wanted to delay the 30 experts. Boom! Gu Qingyu and the other party's attacks formed a barrier of light that soared into the sky. Relying on the divine sword to contend against more than 30 Supreme Being experts, Gu Qingyu was forced to retreat step by step. The mountain rocks under his feet were crushed by him, and the defensive barrier formed by him and the divine sword was almost shattered. Ka! Ka! Ah! At this moment, a mournful scream resounded through the mountains and rivers. One of the 10 Supremes was approached by Tong Tong. Because he didn't pay attention to this little guy, his throat was bitten by Tong Tong. His sharp claws pierced through his shoulder blade. His body was flooded with death chi and his life force dissipated. He died on the spot. Only 8 of the 10 Supremes were left. Supreme martial artist Tianwu's eyes were about to split open and anger filled his heart. These were his 10 most capable subordinates, but the battle had just begun and 2 of them had already died. How could he swallow this? When he looked at the Extreme Treasure Grounds again, he realized that the divine sword had an owner. Only then did he realize that this was a trap. This old man is furious. You guys actually want to start a war between the 2 worlds and shift the blame to me. You want me to bear the infamy of starting the war first. Supreme Sky roared. His divine power erupted and actually resisted Jiang Jingtian and Xiaoye's joint attack. Yi Qinghan sneered. He was not willing to pay attention to Supreme Sky. He held his blade and killed his way into the center of the Supremes. He swept away a Supreme Sky and said to Nangong Sky, Sorcerer God, and Demon God, fellow Taoists, please go to the Extreme Treasure Grounds to support Brother Gu. The 3 extreme experts teleported away from the battlefield and arrived in front of Gu Qingyu, helping him block the attacks of more than 30 people. Their divine energy poured out, and Gu Qinyu's attacks multiplied several times in an instant. He began to launch a powerful counterattack. Boom! 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 More than 30 Supreme Sky experts began to retreat. Their expressions changed greatly because if they retreated any further, they would be in the depths of the Extreme Treasure Grounds. If they got lost, they would die there. Chapter 1379. The ultimate martial realm had more than 30 supreme experts, all of whom were sword experts, but now their faces were filled with shock. Behind them was the heavenly treasure Extreme Land. Although it was a place full of treasures, it was also a place where one could enter but not leave. If they were really sent in by Gu Qingyu, Nangong Tianzuan, and the others, they could forget about coming out. Boom! More than 30 experts erupted with extreme power. Divine light tore through time and space, distorting it. Time was actually somewhat chaotic. Some trees in the periphery of the Extreme Land actually aged and died in just a few breaths. Not far away, some thorny ancient trees grew in reverse, turning into small trees and weeds. The pseudo-boundary artifact Divine Sword was pushed to the limit by Gu Qingyu. The power of the world spread, covering a radius of 10,000 miles. Even the ultimate martial realm outside the world river could clearly sense it. Both sides were in a heated argument, erupting crazily. At this moment, Xue Zhehuang led the army to slaughter the ultimate martial realm army, while Yi Qinghan led the insane sect to kill the 10 martial saints. No, there were only 8 left now. Boom! Yi Qinghan wielded his berserk hammer and broke a divine sword with a single slash. He was like a human bulldozer as he swept through the surroundings. He didn't need to defend at all as he punched a martial saint. Bang! The martial saint's defensive divine armor was broken, the flesh and blood inside were scattered by the iron fist. Puff! That martial saint's face distorted as if he was struck by lightning. He spat out a mouthful of essence blood and wanted to counterattack, but he couldn't mobilize any divine power in his body. He was like a pile of mud, paralyzed on the ground. Boom! Yi Qinghan's big hand pulled out an afterimage, gently raised it, and smashed it on his head. This palm carried the power to destroy the world, directly destroying his soul. The third martial saint died. 3 of the 10 martial saints died instantly. Ka ka ka. Yi Qinghan put away the berserk bracelet and turned it into a pair of boxing gloves. He began to charge forward and cooperated with the berserk sect cultivators to kill the other martial venerables. 3 to 5 of them surrounded one martial venerable and killed the martial venerable with overwhelming advantage. Boom! The last revered martial artist knew that he could not survive, so he charged at Yi Qinghan. With his powerful physical body, he elbowed Yi Qinghan's head. Yi Qinghan countered with an elbow strike. Under the impact of the collision, the opponent's bones were shattered. He screamed in pain and fell backward. Yi Qinghan stomped on his chest and kicked him several hundred meters away. These 10 martial saints were at the same level as Yi Qinghan, but their battle prowess was slightly weaker. In addition, Yi Qinghan had the defensive advantage of Yuling robe, so they were not a match for him at all. Perhaps only the Supreme Sky Martial Saint could force Yi Qinghan back, but they would need to work together to defeat him. With the death of the 10 venerables, the army of the ultimate martial world had lost half of its cultivators. The group of cultivators in the heavenly treasure Forbidden Ground were struggling madly, suppressing Gu Qingyu and the others, forcing them to retreat step by step. Their bodies were distorted, but they still couldn't reverse the situation. Boom! Yi Qinghan ordered Kuang Zong and the others to rush into the Forbidden Ground to support Gu Qingyu and the others. Meanwhile, Shi Gu held the pseudo-world weapon and attacked the Supreme Sky Martial Saint. With 3 powerful cultivators holding 3 pseudo-world weapons, even if there was a difference of 2 realms, they could still turn the situation around. Yi Qinghan stood on the city wall, overlooking the battlefield. He was in control of the situation. As expected, Xian Yinxue followed Yi Qinghan's orders and fought at the front. He was very high profile. Wherever he passed, snow would fall. His white robe fluttered in the wind, looking very elegant. His sword soared through the 9 heavens, causing the army to retreat. His white robe was dyed red, with his own blood and the blood of others. It would be strange if he was not injured after fighting for so long. Yi Qinghan looked at the people in front of Xian Yanxue and happened to encounter a powerful captain. He immediately transmitted his voice, "Use him and get ready to pretend to be dead and leave." Hearing that, Xian Yanxue leaped forward like a tiger, chopping the enemy major general half to death. Xian Yanxue himself was struck by a sword, and his fleshly body exploded in midair, falling into the enemy ranks. Boom! Hundreds of giant god cultivators attacked Xian Yanshue's head. If they hit, even a supreme god would be blown to pieces. In the midst of the sparks, a figure flashed. It was Yi Qinghan. He held the Yinshi's pot and directly took Xian Yanxue away. However, he also took out an expert from the Yinshi's pot and sealed his cultivation, making him replace Xian Yanxue. His speed was so fast that everyone thought it was an illusion. Boom! The place where Xian Yanxue fell was directly smashed into pieces, creating a huge crater. Flesh and blood splattered everywhere. A giant god of heaven was smashed into pieces just like that. No one knew that Xian Yanxue was faking his death. Guangzhong's people charged into the enemy like crazy, sweeping in all directions. The Snow Realm army's morale was boosted, and they wanted to avenge Xian Yanxue. In an instant, the Snow Realm army forcefully occupied the desolate city and kept reaping lives, killing tens of thousands of border army experts. Seeing that the situation was hopeless, if he didn't retreat now, he would never have the chance to leave. Thus, he forced Jiang Jingtian and the other two to retreat. He consumed his life source and erupted with the strength of a fake realm lord, leading a group of soldiers to retreat quickly. Once an expert of this level wanted to leave, it was very difficult to stop him. Yi Qinghan watched him leave and didn't think of stopping him. He only sneered and ordered the army to pursue. The remaining group of people suppressed close to 70 to 80,000 extreme martial realm army experts. With the support of the Guangzhong's people, the group of experts in the heavenly treasure danger ground was directly pushed to the depths of the danger ground. Space and time revolved, and the earth shifted. They instantly disappeared. Seeing that the situation was settled, Yi Qinghan immediately ordered Xue Jiuhuang to stay and save the injured soldiers. He then mobilized the army to support them. After that, he led the army of 250,000 and rushed to the border of the extreme martial realm. On the iron chain, Guangzhong quickly led the army to the other side. Behind them, Xiao Yu, Shi Gu and Jiang Jingtian chased with their fake world artifacts. They didn't even dare to look back and only cared about escaping. When they reached the other side, they still didn't have the time to look back. If they were one step slower, they would be smashed into meat paste by the fake world artifacts. Jiang Jingtian and the others forcefully pursued for several hundred miles, but at this time, Yi Qinghan led his army into the ultimate martial world and brought along 80,000 captives from the ultimate martial world. Extreme Dao City, the city that Yi Qinghan offended the first time he entered the extreme martial realm. This was because this was the world of the extreme Dao sect. Back then, Yi Qinghan had kidnapped two great beauties of the extreme Dao sect and completed the first mission of the Snow Realm army. This extreme Dao city was not far from the border. Yi Qinghan looked at the extreme Dao city and directly handed the army to Zhu Wuxin. He himself led thousands of death squad experts and prepared to wipe out the extreme Dao sect. When they reached the extreme martial realm, it was already late at night. The stars flickered and the vast sky was boundless. More than 1,000 figures quickly approached the extreme Dao sect under the cover of the Guangzhong's experts. As long as they killed the people of the extreme Dao sect, the extreme Dao city would be like a group of dragons without a leader. It would become the first fulcrum of the Snow Realm army. Yi Qinghan, Xiao Yu, Yan Yunbei and the rest quickly approached the extreme Dao sect. The extreme Dao sect was the strongest sect in the vicinity of 1,000,000 li. Furthermore, there was the Snow Realm army at the border. They didn't have to worry about the defense at all. Therefore, they didn't activate the defense formation at night. Even the sentries were very lax. When more than 1,000 people entered the foot of the extreme Dao sect's mountain, they didn't even notice. Yi Qinghan's expression was cold. He waved his hand and said coldly, "Kill. Don't leave a single one of those above the deity level alive." Chapter 1380. There were more than 1,000 death squads, and all of them were giant gods and supreme gods. There were at least 30 of them, including the people from Guangzhou. In addition, there were 4 or 5 pseudo-world weapons. No matter how powerful a sect was, it would not be able to withstand this group of people. For a moment, killing intent surged. Divine light shot out in all directions. The power of the world tore apart all defenses. A sword ray descended from the sky and split Ji Dao's sect into 2. A natural abyss appeared in front of everyone. Kill. The death squads were not polite. They killed everyone they saw. With 3 to 5 giant gods joining hands, they were invincible. As for the supreme god who had just appeared, he was smashed down by a brick. Even if he did not die, he was still seriously injured. Then, he was shattered by several attacks. Corpses were everywhere in Ji Dao sect. They were all wailing miserably. However, if they were not from the same world, they were from different races. Just like how the 7 worlds dealt with De Huang, they had no emotions. They only knew how to kill, plunder, and rape. Yi Qinghan looked at the scene in front of him and clenched his fist. His fingertips twitched, but in the end, he did not do such a beastly thing. You are not allowed to kill women and children. You are not allowed to humiliate women. Violators will be killed. A deep voice exploded like thunder. It shook the death squads of the Snow Realm army so much that they did not dare to act recklessly. They suppressed the madness in their hearts. Yi Qinghan took a deep breath. What he wanted to do was to unify the 9 worlds' heavens. There would be no more races, no more power systems, no more hostile races, and no more hostility. The order of my world will be set by me. Yi Qinghan was firm in his conviction. He was not willing to let hatred blind his eyes. Tong Tong's example was an example. 2 hours later, Ji Dao sect was destroyed. Only the old, weak, sick, disabled, women, and children were left in Ji Dao sect. After that, Yi Qinghan took the head of Ji Dao sect's sect master and went straight to Ji Dao city. Everyone in Ji Dao city was in a state of panic. They did not know whether they should flee or stay. Ji Dao sect was besieged by so many people. If they did not realize it, they would be too stupid. In the end, some experts chose to flee Ji Dao city. They did not even take their families with them. The city guards inside Extreme Path City didn't dare resist. They actually opened the gates to welcome them, allowing Yi Qinghan and Zhu Wuxin to lead their army into the city. Zhu Wuxin was finally excited that the Extreme Dao city had changed hands. This was a good opportunity to show off his skills. In the divine world of Snow Country, he would not be able to lead the army and arrange the troops. He would not be able to display his skills. I will seize the world of the ultimate martial realm. Zhu Wuxin stood on top of the city wall with his hands clenched in the air like a war maniac. He was especially excited. Yi Qinghan grinned and said faintly, "If there's a chance, what I want is not only the ultimate martial realm, but also the unification of the 9 realms. The rest is up to you. I'm not as good as you when it comes to leading and fighting, so I don't have that much thought." "No problem," Zhu Wuxin said confidently. "Shared glory and coexistence. As long as they surrender, we will still use the restrictions placed on them. If we see any geniuses, we will still nurture them. The territories that we have conquered will be under our control. We cannot let hatred spread. This is not the result that I want," Yi Qinghan said faintly. Zhu Wuxin shrugged and said excitedly, "I just want to go to war. Slaughtering is not my ultimate goal. I just want to enjoy the fun of war." One was a maniac, the other was a war maniac. The two of them hooked up. There was no need to waste any words to mingle together. There was no need to suspect anything. Ling Huanyu had been following Yi Qinghan quietly not far behind. Seeing the two of them going crazy, his spine was drenched in cold sweat. At the beginning, he was still suspicious of Yi Qinghan's goal. But now, he finally understood. This guy really wanted to unify the 9 realms. He was planning to scheme against the realm lords of the 7 realms. In this world, who would dare to scheme against the realm lords? Up until now, no one dared to do so. But now, there were 2 of them. Sigh, I only want to become or reach the limit of the realm lords. But you guys want to play with the realm lords. I actually followed you guys. Am I crazy? Ling Huanyu muttered to himself. His eyes were filled with confusion. But now that he had already cultivated the secret technique of the great desolate Tao scripture, he couldn't retreat even if he wanted to. After conquering the extreme Tao city, Yi Qinghan chose to use people to govern people. He used the highly respected people of the extreme martial realm to govern this region. He divided the regions and implemented benevolent governance. It could be considered as treating these living beings well. The commoners and practitioners of the extreme Tao city thought that they would be massacred. They didn't expect that the ruler would be changed. Furthermore, it was changed to a benevolent person that they respected and worshipped. Immediately, they quieted down. 3 days' time was enough for Yi Qinghan to completely control this region. Sovereign Sky suffered great losses this time. Even if he wanted to ask for reinforcements, it wouldn't be done in a short period of time. After all, he had lost 300,000 people in one go. The 10 revered martial artists were all killed. When he returned, he would definitely be punished by the emperor of the extreme martial realm. Just as Yi Qinghan expected, in the main palace of the extreme martial dynasty, a dignified emperor sat at the peak of the main palace. He looked down at Sovereign Sky with a face full of anger and doubt. He was the emperor of the extreme martial dynasty, a supreme existence. He was the direct descendant of the extreme martial realm's realm lord, Wuxia. His cultivation was even stronger than Sovereign Sky. He was a genuine pseudo-realm lord existence. He had been summoned by the realm lord several times and was groomed by him. He was completely different from ordinary people. Great Commander Sky, this emperor is very curious. Why did you do such a foolish thing? You entered deep into the Snow Country's divine realm alone. Aren't you afraid of causing a war between the 2 realms? Wu Jimu asked coldly. My emperor, I am guilty. I thought I could help you get a pseudo-world weapon, but I didn't expect it to be a trap set by the other party. Although the Snow Country's divine realm isn't weak, there is still a big gap between them and my extreme martial realm. I didn't expect them to lure me over with the goal of starting a war between the 2 realms. And in this battle, I found out that they have 5 extreme weapons. It's unbelievable. Sovereign Sky's face was full of unwillingness. He had lost so many troops in one go. It was a great humiliation. It was unprecedented. Wu Jimu frowned. 5 extreme pseudo-world weapons. So far, only 10 of them had appeared. The extreme martial royal family only had 1 as their clan protection treasure. The extreme martial realm only had 2 or 3, and they were all in the hands of some extreme experts who didn't come out. Where did they get so many pseudo-world weapons? Wu Jimu was a little suspicious. He suspected that Sovereign Sky was lying to clear his name. I know the origins of 3 extreme pseudo-world weapons. One is the Thunder God's Hammer, which is the most precious treasure of the Snow Country's divine realm's divine sect. There is also the World-Piercing Spear, which appeared in the Snow Country's divine realm's auction some time ago. As for the Inshir's pot in Zhuofeng's hands, it disappeared a long time ago. I don't know how it appeared in his hands. As for the remaining 2 extreme pseudo-world weapons, I have never seen or heard of them before. One is a sword, and the other is a stone brick. Sovereign Sky bowed and explained. Wu Jimu gave off a cold light. He leaned back slightly and looked at the 100 experts in the hall. He said coldly, "Let them come without leaving. I want all the pseudo-world weapons." Chapter 1381. Wu Jimu's eyes glowed with golden light. His body was strong, and he had reached the limit of martial arts. He was a terrifying character that was hard to deal with. 5 extreme pseudo-world weapons, anyone would be tempted. "General Tianwu, I have ordered the Wuji army and the Dragon army to support your Tianwu army. Where are the Wuji army's commander, Sun Yang, and the Dragon army's commander, Long Ziyue?" Wu Jimu looked at the palace and stared at the 2 middle-aged men. They were both tall and burly, and they were full of battle intent. One look and one could tell that they had been in the army for many years. Sun Yang was an elite of the same generation as Xue Jiuhuang. He was only half a step away from becoming a military saint, and Wu Jimu liked him very much. Otherwise, he wouldn't be in charge of the strongest Wuji army. His cultivation wasn't inferior to Supreme Tianwu, and his ability to lead troops was even better than Supreme Tianwu. He had been in the army for many years and had never lost a battle. He was also given the title of undefeatable general by Wu Jimu. He had a very high position in the army, and he controlled the million-strong Wuji army. Long Ziyue was the vanguard commander. He was intelligent and skilled in both martial arts and literature. He was the soul of the Dragon army. As long as he rushed to the front, the Dragon army would be like a sharp knife tearing apart the enemy. The million-strong Dragon army was said to be able to stop an ordinary army of 10 million. "I will follow your orders. I will definitely cut off the heads of Zhuofeng and Zhu Wuxin and bring them to your majesty with extreme pseudo-world weapons." The 2 stepped forward, and their voices were deep, giving people an inexplicable confidence. It was as if they could definitely accomplish what they had decided to do. "Good. I believe in the 3 of you. Take off the heads of Zhuofeng and Zhu Wuxin and offer them to my 300,000 soldiers." Wu Jimu said coldly. "Yes, your majesty." Sun Yang, Long Zai, and Supreme Tianwu bowed and left with their troops. At the border of the ultimate martial realm, Zhu Wuxin wasn't in a hurry to attack other cities. Instead, he found a map and looked for places that were easy to defend and hard to attack. He wanted to give the army of the ultimate martial realm a head-on blow to boost their morale. Only then would they have a chance to stand firm. Yi Qinghan stood on the city wall, thinking about the next step. Every step was dangerous, and one wrong step would lead to eternal damnation. Furthermore, he was leading the people of the insane sect into the abyss. No one from the arrogant sect should die. Yi Qinghan clenched his fists and was ready to speed up their retreat from the battlefield. The baptism of this battle was enough for them to return to the great wasteland domain and cultivate for a period of time. In the border region of the ultimate martial world, everyone was in a state of panic. They were afraid that the war would affect their region. Ordinary creatures, even giant gods, would not be able to escape from the battle between the border army. Once they were affected, they would die without a doubt. War was cruel, especially to the common people. At this moment, in the divine realm of the Snow Empire, there was a group of people who were taking advantage of the situation to spread propaganda and incite war. Desolate border city was destroyed, and the city was destroyed. The army counterattacked, suppressing the 300,000 celestial martial soldiers, killing 10 martial sovereigns and capturing 80,000 soldiers. Hearing the news, everyone in the Snow Empire and the God Realm was excited. But soon, bad news came. The left martial residents lost a great general, and Xian Yain died in battle. This immediately aroused the anger of the common people. Perhaps many people did not know who Xian Yain was, but the left martial residents should know. Zhuofeng, as the representative of the common people, walked all the way to the position of Snow Empire's commander and assistant minister. He was the idol of many people. More and more people from the Eagle sect of the Snow Empire and the Divine Realm supported the war, and their voices became louder and louder. Those who wanted to join the army rushed to the desolate border city like a tide, hoping to join the border army and follow the left marshal in battle. Immediately after, another report of victory came from the front. The left marshal residence and the military Saint Zhu Wuxin had joined hands and directly captured the extreme martial world's extreme Dao city, destroying the extreme Dao sect. There was an uproar at the back. They were incomparably excited. They felt that the extreme martial world was only so. If they could take down the extreme martial world, then they would be able to hold their heads high. Many people wanted to use their achievements to walk up the path of nobility. This was the fundamental way out for loose cultivators and commoners. Yi Qinghan was in the extreme martial world, but he knew the situation at the back like the back of his hand. The propaganda was designed by him from the very beginning. He also understood how to make the voices of the Snow Empire and the Divine Realm suppress everything. When the entire Snow Empire and the Divine Realm was dragged into the war, once the Realm Master of the extreme martial world came out of seclusion and took action, that old man of the Snow Empire and the Divine Realm would definitely not sit by and do nothing. In a war, the Realm Master would not take action under normal circumstances. Furthermore, they were currently heavily injured. As long as the world was not destroyed, they would definitely not take action. After arranging everything, Zhu Wuxin found Yi Qinghan. He took out a map and drew a few circles, then pointed at the extreme Dao city and said, "Left Marshal, this is the extreme Dao city. It is 150,000 li away from the border. Behind it is the border river. 300,000 li away from the front belongs to the central region. There is a central army stationed there, about 30,000 people. On the right is the extreme martial mountain, on the right is a primeval forest. With the extreme Dao city in the extreme Dao sect as the border, there is a triangular formation. About 3,000 li away, there is a canyon called the Heavenly Gorge. It is the only way to reach the central region. That is the strategic location of the military school. However, because they had the border army guarding the front, they did not send anyone to guard the place alone. Now, I have already sent people to guard this place." Yi Qinghan looked at the division of the city on the map, as well as the attack and defense routes drawn by Zhu Wuxin. He could not help but nod his head. There were no flaws, they could both attack and defend. It was enough for them to take root here. Now, we just need to wait for the 9th Emperor to come to our aid. Yi Qinghan nodded his head. He waved his hand and pulled out one of the star twining vine's doppelgangers. With a tap of his foot, his figure flickered and appeared in the Heavenly Gorge. The Heavenly Gorge was very narrow and steep. There was no support point. Clouds and mist lingered in the sky. It was actually 7-colored. This kind of mist looked very beautiful, but it was also very vicious. After coming into contact with it, one's skin would be unbearably itchy. One's skin would be scratched until one's bones could be seen. This was a commonly seen poison barrier in the gorge. The poison barrier extended endlessly. Only the bottom half of the gorge and below could be passed through. 100,000 Snow Border Army had already built a fortification. From the bottom half of the gorge to below, everyone was from the Snow Border Army. It was impossible to pass through here without paying a price. Yi Qinghan casually threw the star twining vine to the top of the gorge. He ordered it to devour the creatures above and cooperate with the Snow Border Army to defend this place. They wanted to cause more damage to the extreme martial world. The more damage the better. The star twining vine began to devour crazily. Even the plants were devoured by it. The surroundings of the gorge quickly became the territory of the star twining vine. The vines danced in the air. Under the stimulation of the poison barrier, the vines were filled with poisonous gas. Time passed by little by little. The sky gradually darkened. Three great armies appeared in the depths of the extreme martial world. Each of them had 300,000 soldiers. They were in the middle, left, and right. Their destination was the central city of the central continent. The three great armies gathered. A total of 1,000,000 soldiers. There were also three great commanders. It was more than enough to sweep through all four directions and flatten everything. Feeling the tremors of the earth, Yi Qinghan let out a mouthful of turbid qi. Instead, he revealed a relaxed smile that was hard to fathom. Chapter 1382. The Tongtian Gorge was long and deep. There was not a single blade of grass growing on either side of the gorge. Some vicious beasts would occasionally rush through the gorge, their dark green eyes especially dazzling at night. On both sides of the gorge, pairs of excited eyes were filled with anticipation. This battle was the most crucial battle. If they won, their morale would reach the peak. If they lost, their reputation would be ruined. For tomorrow's battle, those who survive will be rewarded with 1,000 snow-step divine stones and 3 giant god-grade divine pellets. Those who kill 10 enemy soldiers will be rewarded with 1 divine pellet and 100 snow-step divine stones. Those who kill a 100-man elder will be rewarded with 1,000 snow-step divine stones and 10 divine pellets. Those who kill a 1,000-man commander will be rewarded with 1 supreme-grade divine pellet and 10,000 snow-step divine stones. You will also be given a personal lecture by this marshal and are allowed to ask 3 questions. Yi Qinghan's deep voice reverberated on both sides of the gorge, resounding through the Tongtian Gorge. The snow border army on both sides of the gorge were incomparably excited. They couldn't wait to start the battle right now. With great rewards, brave men are bound to emerge. This time, the rewards were not just resources and divine pellets. When Yi Qinghan gave a lecture, they would be allowed to ask 3 questions. This was the most important factor for them to ascend to the paramount god realm and become a top existence. Yes. One by one, they lowered their voices and roared. Their veins were bulging as they clenched the crossbows in their hands and carried their spears on their backs. They crawled on the mountainside. Time flew by. The star-twining vine grew at an astonishing speed. It stretched for 100 li and quickly extended to the other side of the mountain range. The vines were sharp and poisonous. They disguised themselves as thorns and shot up into the sky. Those who didn't pay attention wouldn't notice that the ancient trees here had been replaced by the star-twining vine. The Wuji army, Jianwu army, and Divine Dragon army gathered at the Central Prefecture's central city. The Central Prefecture's army was the vanguard as they marched towards the Tongtian Gorge. 100,000 li was merely half a night for the giant gods of the world army. They rode on long carriages pulled by giant beasts. The earth shook with every step they took and their momentum soared to the sky. Nearly 1,000,000 people, their momentum was like a rainbow. They were like the waves of the sea, moving forward wave after wave. Their movements were uniform and no one dared to stop them. After midnight, the stars were hidden and dark clouds gathered. The sky was dark and there were only terrifying waves of qi and earth shaking. Boom! 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 The sound of footsteps shook the heavens, and the sound of drums reverberated in the air, causing everyone's blood to surge and their morale to soar. Who dared to stop them? Who could contend against them? The snow border army was only 30 zhang wide. Of course. Of the snow border, but they did not approach of 300,000 troops, but of soldiers, the Yi Qinghan stood about 30 meters away from the entrance of the gorge and looked at the 1,000,000-strong army on the other side. His face was expressionless, and his body was straight. He held violent hammer, and the corners of his mouth were cold as he waited for the enemy army to break through. Sun Yang, Long Ziyue, and the Sky Marshal Great Master knew that the army must not be tired before the attack. The 3 armies had been rushing for a few days. Now they needed to rest. If they attacked overnight, they would suffer great losses. At this time, the night was so quiet that it made people's hair stand on end. Even the beasts did not dare to wander around. It was so quiet that it made people feel anxious and sad. Set up camp here and rest. Tomorrow, we will slaughter the Snow Border Army. Sun Yang roared. Yes. The three armies roared. A wave of chi raised the sand and dust and rushed to the other side of the sky-passing gorge. Yi Qinghan's eyes flashed coldly. He stomped his foot and a wave of chi swept out and rushed to the other side. Boom! The two waves of chi collided and rushed into the galaxy. They hit the cliffs on both sides and caused sand and stones to roll down, suppressing the million-strong army by himself. His aura was like a rainbow that pierced through the clouds. His back was like an invincible god, causing the Snow Border Army's fighting spirit to become even stronger. With such a commander, why should they be afraid? The Snow Border Army was also resting with their eyes closed. Even the people from the Kuang school were resting. Yi Qinghan alone was enough to hold the fort at the passage. Zhu Wuxin appeared behind Yi Qinghan and looked at the three armies on the other side. Not only was he not worried, he was even more excited. If we win, they will definitely set up the same defense as us on the other side. What should we do? Yi Qinghan indifferently asked. In front of the general, we will advance in a triangular formation. Just like the last battle of the Great Wilderness, their advantage in numbers will not be of much use. We have 5 extreme pseudo-world treasures that are enough to tear apart their defense. Our advantage here will be gone. Zhu Wuxin indifferently replied. Yi Qinghan nodded. His eyes shot out a golden light that pierced through the void and saw the nature of the other side. He saw the central army unwillingly blocking the passage. Their eyes were filled with panic and anger, but it could not save them from their fate of being cannon fodder. Since they are cannon fodder, they must be prepared to be cannon fodder. Yi Qinghan coldly said to himself. Marshal Zhuo wants to use the power of a single soldier to break their cannon fodder attack. Zhu Wuxin looked at Yi Qinghan's momentum that was gathering and couldn't help but ask curiously. Yes, if they use the lives of cannon fodder to push forward, the Snow Border Army's power will not be enough. Only by using pseudo-world treasures to tear apart their defense can we minimize the losses of the Snow Border Army. Yi Qinghan indifferently said. If 30,000 cannon fodder are going to die and forcefully push forward, I'm afraid pseudo-world treasures will not be able to tear them apart. If we hand them over to the Snow Border Army, 100,000 soldiers shooting arrows together will not cause any substantial damage to the barrier. It is a good idea to rely on pseudo-world treasures. Zhu Wuxin immediately agreed with Yi Qinghan's idea. I can only be in charge of this battle. The rest of the command will be handed over to you. Yi Qinghan indifferently said. No problem. Behind us is a flat plain. The power of a single soldier will not be of much use. Just leave it to me. Zhu Wuxin's eyes flashed as he clenched his fist and said. Go back and rest first. At the same time, ask the 9th Emperor to send reinforcements. I have already spread the news in the rear. I think there will be many who want to join the Snow Border Army. You don't have to worry about the source of troops. I am just afraid that you will not be able to take down the ultimate martial realm. Yi Qinghan firmly said. Zhu Wuxin revealed a confident smile and indifferently retreated. Time passed. A smear of red appeared in the sky and illuminated the sky. It was as captivating as fresh blood. The clouds in the sky floated. The sun from the east shone on the clouds on the mountain peak. It was colorful and beautiful to the point of being speechless. On the cliffs on both sides of the canyon, vines were constantly climbing. They were verdant and lush as they wrapped around the entire passage. Boom! The ultimate martial realm's army slowly rose. They moved in unison and formed a column. The 30,000 Central Army became cannon fodder. They were forced to the front and had no choice but to rush into the passage. Hua! The 30,000 Central Army's divine power erupted and formed a huge defensive barrier. They pressed forward step by step. In order to survive, they had no choice but to use all of their strength. They did not dare to be careless. Rush through and we will be able to live. If we can't, this general will live and die with you. The Central Army's general held his sword and roared. He raised the morale of the soldiers and took the lead. Chapter 1383. Boom! Boom! The army's pace was neat and not fast. Step by step, they approached Yiqinghan. The distance of more than 3,000 meters seemed slow, but it was quickly closing in. Hua hua hua. Ka ka ka. Yiqinghan dragged Zhongquang forward step by step. His speed was extremely slow. Zhongquang rubbed against the ground, causing sparks to fly everywhere. The sound was extremely ear-piercing. He stopped when he was 300 meters away because this was the best shooting range of the Snow Border Army. Yi Qinghan clenched Zhongquang tightly. His body leaned back slightly as he gathered his momentum. His momentum was higher than the sky as he rushed towards the clouds. His eyes flickered as if he could move mountains and rivers. One. Zhongquang trembled slightly, shaking the space and time. The sky was already bright. The army could even see the space and time twisting and trembling with their naked eyes. The wind blew, clouds flew, sand and stones were sent flying for 300 feet. They crashed into the cliffs on both sides and were smashed into pieces. The sound was sharp and ear-piercing. Woo woo woo. The wind whistled, causing their battle robes to flutter. Their black hair fluttered behind them and danced with the wind. Although the Central Army had more than 30,000 soldiers, their legs were as heavy as lead when they saw a person standing in front of them. They did not have the slightest confidence in victory. The more they walked, the more difficult it was to move forward. Their Dao heart was unstable. They wanted to retreat, but the extreme martial army behind them held their spears in front of them, forcing them to move forward. The commander of the Central Army looked at Yiqinghan and took a deep breath. He felt that he was not looking at a person, but an undefeatable god. How could a mortal fight against a god? Dong dong dong. The sound of the drums rumbled in the valley. It was very inspiring and swept away the fear in the hearts of the soldiers. Their hearts were surging as they wanted to fight against the heavens and the 9 heavens. Dong dong dong. The Snow Border Army behind Yiqinghan also began to beat the drums. The one who did it was Nangong Tianzuan. His power and momentum were both supreme. The sound of the drums made people feel 100 times more confident. It was as if they were also supreme. The Snow Border Army heard the sound of the drums, they felt their entire body was filled with energy. They took out their realm-opening crossbows and placed their bows. They aimed towards the depths and were ready to attack. A faint smile appeared on Yiqinghan's bold and proud face. He was actually so calm as he waited for the cannon fodder army to charge. There was still a distance of 1,000 meters between them. His opponent's aura caused the air to flow backwards, causing Yiqinghan's black hair to flutter. If it were any other person, they would have long lost their courage. This was because this required not only courage, but also absolute confidence in one's strength. Cold light shot out in all directions. The cold light was oppressive and piercing to the eyes. The tens of thousands of soldiers in the Central Army did not dare to look directly at it. However, the soldiers in the rear were much better because they were the main trump-card army. Boom! Boom! Da-da-da! The army quickened their pace and quickly closed in. In the blink of an eye, they were 500 meters away. Sun Yang, Long Ziyue, and the martial emperor stood behind the Central Army. They coldly looked at Yiqinghan. They could not help but clench their fists. They did not expect the left general, who was at the peak of his power, to be so young and so arrogant. He actually wanted to use his own power to defeat the cannon fodder army. 300 meters, both sides were only 300 meters apart. The barrier of the Central Army's troops soared into the sky, and the crossbow arrows couldn't shoot over, nor could they shoot over. Ing! Yi Qinghan flipped his blade. His blade energy surged, and his aura soared into the sky. Shua! 4 figures appeared behind Yi Qinghan. They were Gu Qingyu, Shi Gu, Xiaoye, and Jiang Jingtian with the pseudo-world artifact. Yi Qinghan had clearly discussed this beforehand. With just a hand gesture, they could all erupt at the same time. Boom! Yi Qinghan leaped up. His blade shocked the world. It tore through the rainbow as he descended from the sky and slashed at the barrier. The veins on his body bulged, and he let out a long, ear-piercing roar. Boom! 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 In an instant, the mountains collapsed and the earth cracked. Even the stable Tongtian Gorge was shaking. Ing! Hua hua hua! Boom! Gu Qingyu's sword cut through the heavens, flattening mountains and rivers, and stabbed into the barrier. The thunder god's hammer in Xiaoye's hand was activated. Lightning covered the sky and gathered into a lightning dragon. It fiercely slammed into the barrier, and the barrier was directly torn apart. Boom! A huge stone brick spun at high speed and fiercely broke through the barrier, causing it to thin and shatter. At this moment, Jiang Jingtian's foot crushed the ground. He became one with his spear and transformed into a bolt of lightning, crashing into the Central Army. Bang! The power of the world exploded in the army. The blast blasted the Central Army into smithereens. A group of people lost control and were sent flying by the blast, crashing into the surrounding cliffs. Boom! Sun Yang, Supreme Martial Emperor, and Long Ziyue instantly erupted. Their swords swept in all directions, ignoring the lives of the Central Army. They all pounced at Jiang Jingtian, wanting to kill him and seize the world-piercing spear. However, how could Yi Qinghan give them the chance? His blade swept across the sky, heading straight for Supreme Martial Emperor. Boom! 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 Whoosh! Shi Gu and Xiaoye attacked Sun Yang and Long Zai respectively. The power of the pseudo-world weapon was enough to destroy the heavens and the earth. The 3 armies behind were still fine, but the Central Army, which was the cannon fodder, had completely lost their formation. They were unable to organize their strength to resist. In an instant, they were badly mangled by the 4 powers of the world, Yi Qinghan's explosive power, and the 3 generals' godly power. They crashed into the cliffs, their bodies exploding. Even their souls did not escape. There was a total of 30,000 soldiers. They were not weak, but it was a pity that this would be their burial ground. Boom! The 5 experts used their pseudo-world weapons to tear through space and time, sending the 3 experts flying. Yi Qinghan, Gu Qingyu, and the others immediately retreated. Fire! Yi Qinghan waved his hand. The army erupted, and 10,000 arrows shot out. Whoosh! Whoosh! The tunnel was covered in arrows, but Sun Yang and the others were not to be trifled with. They immediately shouted, "Pour out your godly power, explode the defensive barrier." Whoosh! A light screen appeared in the tunnel. It was multicolored and pierced through the clouds, blocking the arrows. The army of 1,000,000 erupted at the same time. Even a single person could not shake it. Advance! Sun Yang, Supreme Martial Emperor, and the others raised their swords and shouted. They mobilized the army to charge forward. At that moment, 10,000 vines danced like a river. They bit into the depths of the army like snakes. Whoosh! 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 The start-whining vine was even more terrifying than the world-opening crossbow because its vines were extremely poisonous. They were extremely tyrannical. They directly pierced through the army's armor or scratched their cheeks. The poison erupted, causing the army to scream. They had no time to defend themselves. What the hell is this? Supreme Martial Emperor was furious. He turned around and saw that the start-whining vine had already rushed into the enemy army. Countless vines wrapped around the army, and some people were actually swallowed alive. The poison spread. The army frantically scratched their faces and bodies. Blood and bones could be seen clearly. Give me the world-piercing spear. Yi Qinghan snatched the world-piercing spear from Jiang Jingtian's hand and rose into the sky. The spear swept through half the sky. It was shocking. It was as though the spear wanted to pierce through the world. Open for me. Yi Qinghan merged his body with the world-piercing spear and pierced through the clouds. Boom! Boom! Whoosh! The momentum was like a rainbow, causing the Snow Border Army's morale to soar. However, the Dragon Divine Army, Heaven Martial Army, and Extreme Martial Army were so shocked that their pupils dilated. They could only watch as the spear pierced through the clouds and crashed into the barrier. Chapter 1384. Boom! The water curtain-like barrier was pierced by Yi Qinghan's spear. It was earth-shattering. His aura was comparable to that of a war god. It was as if the firmament had gathered and suppressed the 9 heavens. The indomitable water curtain-like barrier only lasted for a moment before it shattered. It surged in all directions and crashed into the cliffs on both sides. Gravel was crushed and fell down continuously. The barrier formed by millions of soldiers was instantly destroyed by Yi Qinghan and the start-twisting vines. It was enough to shock the world. Hua! War God! War God! Left Marshal! The Snow Border Army went crazy. They stood up and pulled their bows to the maximum, waiting for the order. Yi Qinghan raised the world-piercing spear and activated the world power to cover the entire sky-connecting gorge. His comprehension of the world power was far greater than anyone else. The pseudo-world weapon was displayed to the extreme in his hands. In a short period of time, the army couldn't raise their heads, including the 3 generals. Release the arrows. This is an order. Yi Qinghan roared. However, he was still above the enemy. Once the 10,000 arrows were released, he would be attacked as well. However, the Snow Border Army didn't doubt Yi Qinghan's order. The world-opening crossbow arrows were released. Shio shio shio. The 10,000 arrow rainbows broke through several hundred meters and crashed into the army at the moment when their might was at its peak. Back off. Back off for me. Sun Yang and the others were furious. The sky-connecting gorge was too narrow and affected their movements. They could only retreat temporarily. However, their path of retreat was blocked by the star-twisting vines. Countless vines were even more terrifying than the world-opening crossbow arrows. They were constantly tearing apart the experts' armors and devouring the giant gods. Shio shio shio. Puchi. Puchi. Ah! Miserable screams were incessant. No matter how powerful the army was, when faced with the suppression of the world power and the crossbow arrows, how could they not be flustered? The more flustered they were, the harder it was for them to display their strength. The 300,000 martial extreme army that entered the sky-connecting gorge were battered and exhausted. I will block the left vanguard. You guys protect the army and retreat. Sun Yang was furious. In just a few breaths of time, at least 10,000 of the 300,000 martial extreme army had died. The crossbow arrows were merciless. The vicious vines were even more merciless. They only knew how to devour. Corpses were everywhere and blood flowed like a river. Boom! Sun Yang erupted with power. His sword was like limpid autumn waters. It seemed weak and powerless, but in reality, it possessed world-shaking power as it pierced towards Yi Qinghan's body. Whoosh! The sky shattered. The stones of the heaven-span gorge had existed for countless years, and not even over-gods had been able to extract them. But now, they were beginning to crack. Yi Qinghan's expression was cold. He ignored the tens of thousands of arrows behind him. Those arrows tried their best to avoid touching him. The Snow World army behind him was extremely careful. They all flew past him, fluttering their long robes. However, not many arrows hit him. Even if there were, he dodged them in advance. Seeing Sun Yang's strong attack, he directly gave up on suppressing the army and swept his long spear horizontally. Boom! The spear collided with the divine sword, yet it did not push Sun Yang back. It was clear to see how powerful he was. Bang! Ka ka ka! Yi Qinghan was forced to the ground by the sword and was forced to retreat more than 10 meters. Ding! The sword in Sun Yang's hand trembled. It swept past the spear and went straight for Yi Qinghan's throat. The friction between the spear and the divine sword caused sparks to fly everywhere. It was extremely ear-piercing and soul-stirring. Yi Qinghan's body turned, and the spear changed direction. The divine sword went past Yi Qinghan's neck and hit the cliff on the side. Ding! Whoosh! The divine sword pierced through the cliff. It was only a millimeter away from cutting Yi Qinghan's neck. Yi Qinghan's veins were bulging. His eyes were ferocious. He stomped on the ground and erupted with a power that could swallow mountains and rivers. He forced Sun Yang to retreat. Step by step, the cliff under his feet shattered. The divine sword went past the cliff and rushed forward with the spear. They drew two parallel lines on the cliff. It was a shocking sight. Get out of my way! Boom! Yi Qinghan's arm slightly moved back. He used the inch strike technique. Within half an inch of distance, he exploded with a power that could destroy mountains and rivers. He directly sent Sun Yang flying, but he was also sent flying hundreds of meters away by the recoil. He retreated to the exit of the Heavenspan Gorge. Shoot together. All soldiers, throw your spears. Kill as many as you can. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. Boom boom boom. 10,000 arrows and 10,000 spears pierced through the clouds, shattering the shackles of time and space. They ruthlessly pierced through the armor of the army and tore open the bodies of the extreme martial army. Bang! The bodies of tens of thousands of giant gods exploded. Their flesh and blood splattered on the cliffs on both sides, dyeing the Heavenspan Gorge red. Follow me and kill. Yi Qinghan threw the spear to Jiang Jingtian. He pulled out the heavy sword and took the lead, charging into the army inside the Heavenspan Gorge. The 300,000 soldiers were the vanguard, hiding behind the cannon fodder. However, they had suffered heavy losses. At least half of them had been lost. They had not yet retreated from the gorge and were still entangled with the star-twisting vine. However, the star-twisting vine had been torn apart by Long Ziyue and the Supreme Martial Emperor. Even its main body had been found and blasted into smithereens. Green juice poured out like rain. The giant gods were poisoned when they touched it. Their bodies itched all over. Even if they did not scratch it, it would turn red and fester. Boom! Yi Qinghan and the other 4 experts led the army and charged into the extreme martial emperor army. They swept in all directions. The heroes of Guangzhong fought against 10 of them alone. Dong dong dong. The sound of the drums shook the river and destroyed the poison barrier above. The sun shone down. The gorge was so miserable, like hell. There were corpses and broken limbs everywhere. Some of the experts were not completely dead but were killed by the aftershocks. Their flesh and blood squirmed, making them nauseous. The Snow Border Army had never experienced such a bloody battle. However, they were bloodthirsty at this moment. They did not care about anything else. They killed or were killed. For a moment, this place had become a meat grinder for the giant gods. At least several thousand giant gods died in an instant. The lives of the giant gods were worthless. Even the supreme gods would fall because this place was too narrow. There was no way to dodge. Those with great strength were invincible. When surrounded, even the supreme gods would die. On the battlefield, the individual strength might have some advantages, but the advantages were not great. At least, when surrounded by several thousand giant gods, Yi Qinghan would die even if he did not have the pseudo-world artifact and the feather spirit robe. Man could not win against the heavens, just like how the supreme extreme martial emperor could not reverse the situation. The three supreme commanders were all more terrifying than Xue Jiuhuang. However, they were powerless now. They could only try their best to stop Kuang Zong from leading the army to slaughter. The remaining extreme martial emperor army of less than 100,000 retreated from the Tongtian Gorge. They were either seriously injured or poisoned. Retreat. When Yi Qinghan led the army to the other side of the Tongtian Gorge, he saw the Dragon Divine Army and the Heavenly Martial Army ready to fight head-on. He did not hesitate to give up the advantage and led the army back to the entrance. This battle took away 200,000 lives of the extreme martial army while the Snow Border Army lost less than 20,000 men. This was all because of Yi Qinghan, Shi Gu and the others and the 5 pseudo-world artifacts. Otherwise, the Snow Border Army would not have made it back alive. Sun Yang and the others glared angrily at Yi Qinghan on the other side of the gorge. Chapter 1385. 4 pairs of sharp eyes stared at each other across the Tongtian Gorge. Their eyes were filled with killing intent. The Tongtian Gorge was like a chasm between heaven and earth that could not be crossed. The thick smell of blood assailed their nostrils. When the battle ended, the Snow Domain Army could not bear it anymore. How many years had it been since the last World War? Since the end of the Great Desolation War, there were very few conflicts between the two worlds, and it was not like now where people's eyes turned red. Hiss hiss. Both sides sucked in cold air, some could not bear to look at the Tongtian Gorge. It was too cruel, a bit like hell, or maybe even more disgusting and terrifying than hell. Yi Qinghan, Sun Yang and the other 2 commanders did not have any reaction. They looked at each other through the corpses, the killing intent in their eyes was self-evident. Zuo Feng, this commander will cut you into pieces. Even if I chase you to the Snow Empire's holy city, you will not be able to escape. Sun Yang roared. The 300,000 Wuji army, known as the strongest army, was crippled by Yi Qinghan in one move. There were less than 100,000 left, and some of them were injured. He felt very humiliated and could not bear it. He wanted to wash the Zhou commander's residence with blood. Only by cutting the Zhou commander into pieces could he wash away this stain. Bragging, this commander knows how to do it too. If you have the guts, don't retreat just now. See if this commander can bury you in this Tongtian Gorge. Yi Qinghan sneered and said loudly. You, Sun Yang clenched his fists, his 10 fingers dug into his flesh, dripping with blood. His eyes were filled with red, as if he had gone mad. This commander will wait for you here. I have destroyed 300,000 Tianwu army, so I can also destroy 300,000 Wuji army. Yi Qinghan said coldly. Mocking and ridiculing voices reverberated in the Tongtian Gorge and did not disperse for a long time. Sun Yang, Tianwu Supreme and Long Ziyue were very famous, but when they heard Yi Qinghan's provocation, they could only stare. There was nothing they could do, who asked them not to set up an army to protect this place from the start. Clearly, the ultimate martial realm did not do that. They were confident that the Snow Empire and Divine Realm could not attack the ultimate martial realm. Think of a way to disperse the poisonous miasma in the sky and attack from the sky. This marshal wants to twist off the head of this arrogant brat. Sun Yang roared. However, the martial saint shook his head and helplessly said, dispelling the poison is impossible. This is the Tongtian Gorge. The poison in the sky comes from the sky and is endless. Once the poison is disturbed, it is very likely that it will affect us. Long Ziyue took out a map and immediately said, if you want to take a detour, the closest one would be the Heavenly River province. The army will need at least 3 days to get there. The Heavenspan Mountains stretched all the way to the Milky Way prefecture. The distance between a prefecture and a prefecture was vast, and when you added in the fact that an army was traveling at full speed, it would waste a lot of time. Taking a detour was clearly not worth it. You guys stay here and confront them. Or you can attack and stall for time. I'll mobilize the rest of the Wuji army to attack from the rear. Sun Yang coldly glanced at Yi Qinghan. He had already made up his mind to kill him. No matter what price he had to pay, he would destroy him. Soon after, Sun Yang quickly left and rushed towards the Milky Way prefecture. Yi Qinghan slightly released his divine sense. He knew the other side of the Tongtian Gorge like the back of his hand. He knew that Sun Yang had left and that he was preparing to take a detour to attack from the front and rear. Inform the absolute marshal to prepare to attack from the other side. Destroy the remaining 2 armies and occupy the central city. Messenger, inform the 9th Emperor to quickly come to his aid. He must arrive at the Extreme Path City within 2 days and cooperate with my attack. Yi Qinghan quickly gave the order and the Extreme Path City quickly became active. In the divine world of Snow Country, Xue Jiuhuang had been hesitating whether to start a war with the ultimate martial world or not. After all, the difference between them was too great. The divine world of Snow Country only had 300-something prefectures while the ultimate martial world had 400. In terms of size and strength, they were inferior to the ultimate martial world. However, the 2 lunatics at the front line had already reached the Tongtian Gorge, causing him to be in a dilemma. And at this moment, there was a group of people spreading the Snow Country Army's achievements all over the divine world of Snow Country, encouraging them to fight and arousing their sense of glory. The left martial residence's generals were constantly dying, but the Snow Country Army's casualties were very few. The news of victory kept coming, causing the Eagle Sex warmongers to want to start a war even more. And Yi Qinghan, without the permission of Xue Jiuhuang, actually set up a recruitment point near the desolate city and forcefully recruited soldiers. He promised to give them resources and military positions. Xue Jiuhuang was currently mobilizing his troops. He wanted to support Yi Qinghan and ask them to retreat after taking down the Tongtian Gorge. It would be fine as long as he had some face. But he didn't expect the left martial residents to start recruiting soldiers themselves. Furthermore, they had recruited several million soldiers in just 10 days. Who is helping the left martial recruit soldiers? Why are there so many people joining the Snow Country Army? Xue Jiuhuang asked angrily. Emperor, it's Lord Ji Gu. A middle-aged guest immediately said. He was Xue Jiuhuang's trusted military advisor, Shang Qing. His ability to lead troops was extremely strong, but he was very conservative. He was the complete opposite of Zhu Wuxin. What? Is Ji Gu crazy? Isn't he unwilling to participate in the affairs of the world? Why would he help the left martial recruit soldiers? Xue Jiuhuang was shocked and asked in disbelief. Emperor, for people like Zhu Wuxin and Lord Ji Gu, sometimes a large-scale world war is more exciting than their breakthrough. I don't doubt that if they have enough soldiers, they will be able to reach the imperial city of the ultimate martial realm. Shang Qing smiled bitterly. War lunatics. They are all lunatics. What are they trying to do? Why is Ji Gu with the left martial and Zhu Wuxin? Xue Jiuhuang was flustered and exasperated. He didn't want to fight. A world war would drag the realm lord into it. Even if the Realm Lord didn't take action now, he would definitely take action when they reached the Imperial City. At that time, how many people would die? Furthermore, would they be able to reach the Imperial City? He was very clear about how strong the ultimate martial realm was. It was at least 40% stronger than the divine realm of Snow Country. Shang-Qing smiled bitterly and shook his head. The divine realm of Snow Country was already very excited. 60% of them wanted to fight. As the only disciple of Ling Yan, Ji Gu was recruiting soldiers now. At least 70 or 80% of them wanted to fight. The outcome was already decided. Xue Zhehuang couldn't change the outcome. Xue Zhehuang sat on the armchair dispiritedly and leaned on it. His fingertips trembled slightly. There was anger in his eyes but also a trace of expectation. What's the situation now? Xue Zhehuang asked hoarsely. The left marshal and Zhu Wuxin are at the Tong Tian Gorge. They just received a report of victory. With 20,000 Snow Country soldiers as the price, they suppressed Sun Yang, Supreme Sky Martial Realm and Long Ziyue's joint attack. They killed 200,000 soldiers of the Ultimate Martial Realm and heavily injured 100,000. The three armies retreated to the other side of the Tong Tian Gorge. I don't understand. Shang-Qing said faintly. And the true martial realm at the border is restless. They have gathered 1 million soldiers at the intersection of the three worlds. They seem to be waiting for the result. I believe that if we lose, they will definitely join forces with the ultimate martial realm to attack our Snow Country and Divine Realm. If we win, the ultimate martial realm will definitely be attacked. Chapter 1386. The current situation was extremely chaotic. True martial domain, Snow Country, Divine Domain, and Ultimate Martial Domain only had a border river and a torn land as the dividing line. Everyone wanted to gain some benefits in the War of the Worlds. They wanted to enter other worlds to plunder some resources and then retreat. True Martial Domain had this idea. It was not an exaggeration to say that they were kicking them when they were down. At the front line, Yi Qinghan and Zhu Wuxin were discussing countermeasures to rush through the Tongtian Gorge. They were just waiting for reinforcements from the rear. Xue Zhehuang thought for a long time and decided to use the Falcon Squad. They rushed to the front line under Shang-Qing's lead. With the Falcon Squad, although there were not many of them, they represented the backbone of the force. Yi Qinghan was confident that he could break through the Tongtian Gorge. However, it was obviously not enough. They would have to face an army of 680,000. They were all elite troops led by 2 supreme commanders. It would not be easy to fight. However, on the same night, Ji Gu brought 3 million troops to Extreme Path City. They were training their troops through battle. With Ji Ji's arrival, Yi Qinghan suddenly smiled. With Ji Gu and Zhu Wuxin's help, it would not be a problem to reach Ultimate Martial Domain's sacred city. Brother Ji Gu, you take 2 million troops to the rear to prevent Sun Yang from leading the Extreme Martial Army. Leave the battle of the Tongtian Gorge to us, Yi Qinghan said with a smile. Okay, these troops do need to be trained. Ji Gu was not in a hurry. He took the 2 million troops to practice formations, cooperation, and defense. Late at night, the army was ready to move out in units of 100,000. The people of the crazy sect were at the front. 5 great cultivators were holding pseudo-world weapons. They formed a triangle or a flat pyramid and advanced forward. The power of the world from the 5 pseudo-world weapons soared into the sky and formed an impenetrable net. Lightning constantly appeared on the net. It was incomparably fierce. Boom! Boom! The army advanced. 100,000 people were in a column. They could attack or retreat. It was not as crowded as the Extreme Martial Army. The Snow Border Army gazed at the backs of Yi Qinghan and the others. They were not worried or afraid at all. Instead, they were excited and full of fighting spirit. Because the commanders of the left marshal's residence were at the front while the weak ones were at the back. They were definitely not cannon fodder. Compared to those of the Central Army who died in vain, they were much happier. Zhu Wuxin was in the center of the first and second phalanx, being carried by a few people. He looked down from above and observed the enemy's phalanxes. His mind was spinning rapidly, trying to find a way to break through. The morale of the Snow Realm army was like a rainbow. Their undefeatable faith was strengthened with every step they took. It was as if the 600,000 trump-card troops in front of them were like grass. However, they didn't know that the 600,000 people in front of them were equivalent to 1,000,000 Snow Realm army. They were only 300,000 regular troops. The 1,000,000 troops behind them were the trump-card troops who hadn't received any training. If the 300,000 troops were defeated, they would be slaughtered like ants. However, they weren't afraid. Their cultivation wasn't bad, and they were following the legendary commander's way. What was there to fear? So what if he died in battle? Whoosh! Whoosh! The sand and stones on the cliff were shaken off and smashed onto the ground, stirring up sand and dust. Kill! With an order, the hearts of the people were roused. The heaven-shaking drum sounded again. Nangong Tianzuan, the first generation which God and the demon god personally beat the drum. A supreme aura filled the air, shaking the blood and chi of the army, causing their morale to soar. Release the arrows. Whoosh! 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 300,000 sharp arrows shot towards the light barrier at the same time. However, just as they hit the barrier, they were shattered by the power of the world and scattered in all directions, piercing through the cliff. Release the arrows. Whoosh! Long Ziyue personally held a huge bow. The ground was shattered as the huge bow was pulled back. The divine arrow was covered in lightning as it directly broke through the void and hit the barrier. Boom! The fluctuation of the barrier instantly increased by 10 times. The divine arrow spun around the barrier, wanting to break through the barrier. Humph! Yi Qinghan coldly snorted. He twisted his body and stepped on the mountains and rivers, forcibly blocking the rebound force from the barrier. Boom! Yi Qinghan's palms smashed onto the barrier and a ray of divine power attacked the arrow. Bang! The arrow withstood the terrifying divine power and kept rubbing against the barrier, causing the void to distort. However, in the end, it did not break through the barrier's defense and was completely shattered. That Sky Destroyer bow. Today, I will destroy them. Long Ziyue's tall and sturdy body was filled with tyranny and wildness. His vigorous face under his beard was filled with coldness. Ka! 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 The army behind dragged a carriage over. It was wrapped in a piece of black cloth and appeared in front of the army. It was pulled off by the army. It was actually a huge bow that was 10 meters long. There were 3 huge arrows that were 20 meters long on the carriage. They were extremely sinister and sharp. Boom! Long Ziyue transformed into a huge god and stepped onto the iron carriage. Thousands of soldiers stabilized the iron carriage and did not allow it to move. Hiss! Hiss! Whine! Long Ziyue pulled the huge bow. Blue veins popped out as the bowstring vibrated. Time and space became unstable. Extreme divine power poured out as the huge bow was slowly pulled back. Although this Sky Destroyer bow was not a pseudo-world artifact, its explosive power was not inferior to a pseudo-world artifact. It was even stronger. Time and space were cut apart by the bowstring. The crossbow arrow shot out divine light in all directions as it was aimed at Yi Qinghan. Long Ziyue's hands were trembling. The power required by this Sky Destroyer bow was too great, but he was still accumulating power. Yi Qinghan frowned. His eyes were like an eagle's as he stared at the Sky Destroyer bow. This huge Bao was born in the desolate era and its power was terrifying. Once the barrier was shattered, the 100,000 soldiers in the valley, including him and Quang Zong, would be seriously injured. Boom! The Sky Martial Saint flew into the sky and supported Long Ziyue. The huge Bao was instantly pulled back. Everyone, support the barrier. Use all your power. Yi Qinghan suddenly stopped. His feet formed a figure 8 as blue veins popped out all over his body. He transformed into the true body of a huge dragon and blocked the front. Boom! The divine power of the 100,000 soldiers poured out. Snow danced in the air as the barrier was strengthened and solidified into a barrier of time and space. Two extreme peak attacks against Yi Qinghan's Quang Zong and the 100,000 Snow Realm army. Whether the spear or the shield was stronger would be revealed in the next moment. The army held their breaths as they watched one side pull back the bow and the other side get into a defensive posture. They were all waiting for the result. Hua! Boom! The giant arrow destroyed everything in its path and drew out a long flaming dragon. In the blink of an eye, it crashed into the enchantment. Whine! The crazy impact and restless sound resounded through the sky and reverberated in the valley. A wave of air rushed out and shook the Tongtian Gorge. Rocks fell and smashed many people to death. There were Snow Realm army and Dragon God army. The rocks brought with them a destructive wave of air that was extremely destructive. Some of the giant gods' bodies were directly smashed into powder. Blood sprayed everywhere. It was extremely terrifying. Ka ka ka. Yi Qinghan took 2 steps back. His bones were cracking, especially his elbows. The mountain road under his feet was crushed. His eyes were ferocious as he glared at the Sky Destroyer bow. After this collision, he realized that he had underestimated this weapon. Its strength lay in its explosive power and support. Although the material was far inferior to a pseudo-world weapon, the power it could unleash was even more terrifying than a pseudo-world weapon. If he had not poured out all his divine power, the barrier would have been shattered. Chapter 1387. Boom! Puff! Everyone from the insane sect spat out blood and retreated. The Snow Border army at the back coughed out blood and almost fainted. However, the barrier did not break, but the arrow was still spinning crazily, trying to tear the barrier apart. Kill! The Divine Dragon army shot out 10 waves of arrows. After 10 waves, they threw their spears at the barrier. The barrier was on the verge of collapse, but it was still intact. Yi Qinghan swallowed a supreme divine pellet without hesitation. His divine power rushed to his limbs and bones, and the barrier condensed again. Hua! The barrier was filled with the laws and order of the world. A sound wave and energy rushed to the other side, blowing away the front row of the army. Boom! 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 The firm steps of the army were accompanied by the sound of the drum. The passage was filled with cracks and momentum. Long Ziyue and Martial Emperor's expression changed. They did not expect Yi Qinghan to block the attack of the Sky Destroyer bow. Set up the barrier, block them in the passage and wait for reinforcements. Martial Emperor's eyes flashed coldly. He did not want to fight to the death with Yi Qinghan. After all, the 5 pseudo-world weapons could blast the 600,000 army until they lost their bearings. Hua! The 2 Supremes took the lead to set up a barrier 30 meters away from the exit. Then, with the support of 600,000 soldiers, it formed an indestructible barrier. Divine light fluctuated like ripples on water. Under the illumination of the sun, it looked very beautiful. Boom! After 10 breaths, the 2 barriers collided. Qi rushed to the starry river and the cliff trembled, but it did not collapse. Kacha! Yi Qinghan retreated and crushed the mountain rocks. However, the two martial emperors were also shaken. The 600,000 army had the advantage. They could attack together, but the Snow Border army only had 100,000 to cooperate with the insane sect. Humph! The 100,000 Snow Border army suffered a heavy blow. Although most of the force was taken by the insane sect, it was not easy for them. Boom! 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 The two armies continued to collide. Chi waves rushed to the sky and collided with each other. It was like a tug of war. The aftermath of the collision made the army bleed from their 7 orifices. Even Yi Qinghan's body was cracking and almost exploded. Whoosh! Whoosh! Yi Qinghan's boiling dragon blood rapidly healed his wounds. In addition, he still had more than half of the Supreme God Medicine's power left. Now, Yi Qinghan's body twisted as he forcefully pushed the energy barrier forward. Ka ka ka. The rocks beneath his feet kept crumbling, and the cliffs on both sides were shifting. It was as if the tectonic plates underground were being moved. Stop them. Let's go. Long Ziyue roared angrily. He didn't expect Yi Qinghan's body to be even stronger than his own. In the face of such a collision, Yi Qinghan was standing at the front and withstanding it, yet he was still able to erupt with such strength. What he didn't know was that 80% of the shockwaves from the collision with Yi Qinghan's body had been absorbed by the feather spirit robe. Otherwise, with his strength, his body would have collapsed long ago if he had withstood the majority of the impact. However, Yi Qinghan's body was indeed terrifying. The 5 elemental Dao body and dragon vein were like immortal. After being injured, they were able to quickly recover. It wasn't something an ordinary person could compare with. To humans, he wasn't even considered a human. He was a saint whose body had reached the limit. Yi Qinghan's gaze was cold as he forcefully pushed forward with his army. He wanted to push them out of the Tong Tian Gorge. Seeing the Dragon Divine Army and Heaven Martial Army crazily expending their divine power, a sinister smile appeared on his face. If 100,000 soldiers were to exhaust the divine power of 600,000 soldiers, the remaining 200,000 Snow Kingdom army and 1,000,000 other soldiers would be able to shock these 600,000 people to death. Boom. Ka. The cliffs on both sides were broken, and the rocks were crushed into fine powder by the two barriers, disappearing into nothingness. Yi Qinghan actually brought his army and pressed forward step by step. They were only 8 meters away from the exit. Boom! Pressing forward step by step, Supreme Sky Martial Army and Long Ziyue retreated step by step. 600,000 people couldn't withstand 100,000 people. All experts above the rank of Chiliarch, stop them at all costs. Wait until dawn, General Sun will come to their aid. At that time, we will squeeze them to death in this Tong Tian Gorge. This will be their final resting place. Long Ziyue roared. He didn't want to fight against Yi Qinghan because they didn't have a pseudo-world artifact. However, how could Yi Qinghan give them the chance to do so? His body erupted, and with a loud boom, they were pushed back another meter. Advancing another meter was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Mo Li, Li Feng, Jiang Jingtian, and the other physical experts stood at the front, pressing forward step by step. Little Yu, use the Thunder God's lightning hammer to bombard the barrier. I will guide the lightning towards the opponent's barrier. Yi Qinghan shouted in a deep voice. Hua! Little Yu flew into the sky. Her long robe fluttered, and her slender legs shattered space. The Thunder God's lightning hammer attracted the lightning elements in the world, turning them into a terrifying lightning dragon and bombarding the barrier. Yi Qinghan mobilized the source of lightning and guided the lightning to cross the barrier formed by the power of the world. It directly bombarded the barrier where the army was gathered. It crazily tore apart the energy, and the internal order of the opponent's barrier was shattered. Bang! Yi Qinghan and the 100,000 soldiers erupted at the same time, forcibly shattering the opponent's barrier. Hua! A wave of air crashed into the dragon god army at the outermost perimeter and halfway up the mountain. Many people died on the spot, and even more people were sent flying. The entrance was opened, and the Snow Realm army charged in under Yi Qinghan's lead. Shua! Divine spears suddenly shot out from the two wings of the 100,000 soldiers. They were like scythes that reaped lives. They tore apart divine armors and destroyed the corporeal bodies. Following that, their souls were obliterated by the army behind. Boom! Yi Qinghan led them like a world-piercing spear, unstoppable, reaping the lives in front of them. Long Ziyue and Sky Marshal Supreme, the two great commanders, were unable to take the lead. Once they died, the army behind them would be completely disrupted. They could only reluctantly give up the 100,000 soldiers at the front and gather the 580,000 soldiers at the back to retreat 1 li. They immediately arranged the troops and attacked the Snow Realm army head-on, not allowing a large number of troops to rush out of the Tongtian Gorge. The 100,000 Dragon God army at the front was brutally suppressed. However, if they didn't kill the sneak attackers, those who stubbornly resisted would definitely die. Moreover, they would die very miserably. After wiping out the 100,000 soldiers, the Snow Realm army's morale was high. Just as they were about to charge at the enemy, the Dragon God army and Sky Marshal army's hundreds of thousands of crossbow bolts shot out, covering the sky and covering the earth. They were caught off guard and instantly lost several thousand Snow Realm army elites. Boom boom boom. Yi Qinghan, Jiang Jingtian and the others quickly soared into the sky. Their long blades cut through the clouds and cut off the crossbow bolts. Their spears disrupted thousands of crossbow bolts, forming a huge arrow rain vortex. More and more crossbow bolts went out of control, saving the lives of the Snow Realm army. Hua! Yi Qinghan held the Inshir's pot in his left hand and released a beam of light, sucking all the arrows into the Inshir's pot. However, a portion of the arrows were very fast and violent. They only deviated from their trajectory and still shot into the Snow Realm army, causing a lot of losses. Follow me and kill. Shirgu smashed out a brick. It became bigger and bigger, covering half the sky. He wanted to suppress the Dragon God army at the front. At this time, the army at the back also rushed out of the Tongtian Gorge and surrounded the army. Falcon Troop and Kuang Zong turned into sharp blades and scattered the arrangement of the two great commanders. The rich experience of the two great commanders was useless. They could only rely on their individual strength. The generals were used as pawns and were not of much use. Instead, they were surrounded by Kuang Zong and Falcon Troop. Chapter 1388. The 1,000,000 scattered soldiers did not know how to fight. They only knew how to kill anyone they saw. 30 to 50 people surrounded one person and hacked at him. Even a tiger could not hold up against so many wolves. Soon, the army was completely scattered. The Tianwu army and the Dragon army were stunned by Yi Qinghan's insane sect and the Hunting Eagle army. Even the two extreme generals could not stop them. Yi Qinghan gave up on trying to surround the two extreme generals because they were too strong. Instead of surrounding him, it was better to scatter the army. At this time, the Tianwu army and Long Ziyue chased after Yi Qinghan. They were furious and wanted to crush him. However, Yi Qinghan kept dodging and madly attacking the army. He was like a human bulldozer. His long sword swept the ground like a tiger among sheep. Boom! The two extreme generals surrounded Yi Qinghan, but each time, they accidentally injured their own people. The army was scattered even more. When Long Ziyue and the Tianwu army were almost done venting their anger, they looked at their own army and saw that it had completely sunk into the sea. 30 to 50 people surrounded one person. The situation was completely one-sided. After the army was scattered, the insane sect and the Hunting Eagle army gathered in front of them. Their pseudo-world weapons shone brightly. It was a shocking sight. How long had it been before the million-strong army was destroyed? The three of them were among the strongest generals, but they had been beaten back to their original state in the sky-passing gorge. They were miserable. They hated Yi Qinghan to the core. But it was useless. The insane sect had so many elites and so many pseudo-world weapons. They could be killed if they surrounded them. Retreat. Retreat at all costs. Retreat to the central state. Woo, 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 the bugle horn for retreat sounded, and it shook the 9 states. Boom. The two extreme generals worked together to unleash a sword attack. Their auras soared through the galaxy as they attacked the army. They hoped that the army could work together to resist and give the Dragon Army and the Tianwu Army a chance to escape. Sure enough, the sharp sword aura forced the army to work together to resist. The remaining 2 armies had less than 200,000 people left. They quickly fled toward the central state. There was no way Yi Qinghan would allow these 2 supreme elites to behave so atrociously. He looked at each other and stepped forward. His pseudo-world weapon tore through space and time to attack the 2 great elites. Long Ziyue and the other man only resisted for a moment before quickly retreating. The army galloped forward, taking advantage of their victory to pursue the enemy. The beginning of the battle at Skysplit Gorge represented the official start of the war between the 2 worlds. News of the victory at Skysplit Gorge spread to the rear, causing the 9th prince to be incomparably excited. This was a political achievement. The previous emperor had ascended the throne for tens of thousands of years and had not made any great achievements, but he had just ascended the throne and his generals had already made great contributions. Men, pass down my orders. Promote the left marshal to a new title. Give him the title of Left Divine King, and the absolute marshal the title of Absolute Sovereign King. Reward him with 100,000 snow-step divine stones and 100 beauties. Reward the 3 armies and strive for a complete victory in the war of the ultimate martial realm. Spread the divine might of my Snow dynasty. The 9th prince was overjoyed. He gathered all the civil and military officials and said this in a high-profile manner. Xue Fei heard that he was going to give 2 different titles, but she did not object. In her eyes, Zhuo Feng was her man. He deserved everything he got. If it wasn't for the fact that the throne of the dynasty belonged to her own son, she would probably want to abolish the emperor and set up a new one. Those old bastards of the imperial family only knew that the war between the 2 worlds had begun when they heard that the emperor was going to give a different title. They were originally very angry, but when they found out that the reason for the war was the invasion of the ultimate martial realm and that they had achieved a complete victory, they relaxed. An old man of the imperial family came out of seclusion and sat on the throne. The 9th prince stood there respectfully, not daring to show any disrespect. This old man was much older than the previous emperor. He had once been the emperor and was called Emperor Shuiyan. However, he was focused on cultivation and gave the throne to his descendants. It was passed down for a few generations before it reached the hands of the previous emperor. Now that it was in the hands of the 9th prince, even if the old man wanted to abolish him, he and Xue Fei would not dare to say anything. Old ancestor, how come you have time to come out? The 9th prince bowed and asked tentatively. Who is this Zhuo Feng and Zhuo Shuai? Who were the ones who led the army to counterattack the ultimate martial realm? Why didn't you inform the elders of our clan about the war between the 2 worlds? Who is leading the Snow World Army now? Emperor Shuiyan asked coldly. The 9th prince felt a tingling pain in his spine. Emperor Shuiyan was too strong. His aura was monstrous. The moment he appeared, all the officials in the imperial court did not dare to make a sound. Old ancestor, Zhuo Shuai is the disciple of the city lord of Cloud City. His cultivation talent is top-notch. He has been following this brat since the beginning of the year. He is loyal and devoted to the country and has almost died a few times. This time, one of the military saints leading the army is Ju Wu Xian. He is the right-hand man of 5th Imperial Uncle. The other one is Mr. Ling Yan's disciple, Ji Gu. You should have heard of them. The 9th prince immediately brought out Ji Gu. Emperor Shui Yan did not give anyone face, but he had to give Ling Yan face. Ji Gu represented Ling Yan. With him leading the army, Emperor Shui Yan would not make things difficult for him. As for the one leading the Snow World Army, it is this brat's 9th Imperial Uncle, Emperor Shui Jiuhuang. 5th Imperial Uncle was assassinated by Divine Sect Master. He even wanted to kill me. If it wasn't for Mr. Zhu's protection, I'm afraid I would have died. In the end, 9th Imperial Uncle was alerted and he led the army to destroy Divine Sect. The 9th prince immediately pushed all the responsibility to the Divine Lord. He did not dare to say that all of this was planned by Yi Qinghan. Divine Sect was destroyed. Emperor Shui Yan frowned. But when he heard that Divine Sect Master dared to assassinate a prince of the imperial family and the commander of the Snow World Army, he immediately smiled coldly. He deserved to die. When God Lord Jiang returns, I will personally explain to him. Emperor Shui Yan said coldly. Thank you, old ancestor, for your understanding. Old ancestor is wise. The 9th prince was overjoyed and immediately knelt down. Humph. Less nonsense. Tell me the situation at the front lines and the attitudes of the citizens. Emperor Shui Yan said in a low voice. As a former emperor, he thought far more than the 9th prince. News just came from the front lines. In the Battle of Tong Tian Gorge, Marshal Zhua, Marshal Zhu and Mr. Ji Gu worked together and defeated the Wuxia army, Dragon Army and Sky Martial Army. They killed close to 600,000 enemies and captured 100,000. Only 200,000 soldiers escaped under the lead of Sun Yang, Sovereign Sky Marshal and Long Ziyue. Our side won. The 9th prince was extremely excited, as if he was the one who led the battle. Emperor Shui Yan was a bit surprised. It was impossible for him not to know Sun Yang, Sovereign Sky Marshal and Long Ziyue. They were all peak existences of the older generation and had more experience in leading troops than Emperor Shui Jiuhuang. They could be considered as military experts. Although they were a bit weaker than military saints, they shouldn't have been defeated by 3 juniors and suffered such heavy losses. What kind of advantage did the 3 of them use to win? This emperor is a bit curious. Emperor Shui Yan muttered to himself, as if he was asking the 9th prince. The 9th prince said proudly, Old ancestor, you don't know. Mr. Ji Gu has received the true teachings of Mr. Ling Yan. Zhu Wuxin is also known as a military saint. He only lacks actual combat experience when leading troops. The Zhuo martial residence has many experts and has even collected 5 extreme Dao pseudo-world artifacts. With them, no matter how great the advantage was, it would still be destroyed. They are strong in leading troops, but after being scattered, they would still be a useless army. Chapter 1389. Emperor Shui Yan was a bit shocked. The left martial residence had actually collected 5 extreme pseudo-world weapons. How lucky was that? Emperor Shui Yan sank into deep thought. His eyes flickered as he thought of something. Pass down my order. Let Zhuo Feng and Ji Gu fight their way to the center of the ultimate martial realm, the Fu Tian state. Then, negotiate with them to get the most profit. Then, let him give me 2 extreme pseudo-world weapons. I need them, Emperor Shui Yan said indifferently as if the pseudo-world weapons were his. 9th prince's mouth twitched. He wanted to say something but stopped. He didn't dare to refute. What? You don't want to? Emperor Shui Yan frowned and asked. No, no, no. Forefather, it is a time of war. Bringing back the pseudo-world weapons from the front lines is a bit. 9th prince smiled bitterly. Even he felt that it was too much to ask for pseudo-world weapons. Could Yi Qinghan give them to him? A bit what? I want to go out and need pseudo-world weapons. Just give the order. I will wait to use them, Emperor Shui Yan said coldly. Ninth Prince didn't dare to refute. He could only lower his head and accept the scolding. Then, he issued an imperial decree to ask for pseudo-world weapons from the front lines. At the front lines, the army was already cleaning up the battlefield. The ordinary army had lost close to 300,000 men while the Snow Kingdom army had lost less than 50,000 men. It could be seen how big the difference between an ordinary army and a trained army was and how important teamwork was. Supreme gods were indeed very strong. One thought was enough to kill an ordinary giant god. However, when dozens of powerful giant gods were gathered together, their attacks were unified and orderly. They were well trained and could turn the situation around. This was the role of an army. No matter how strong a single soldier king was, without the support of pseudo-world weapons, Yi Qinghan would be exhausted to death in an army even if he had the feather spirit clothes. Meanwhile, in Extreme Dao City, he was training his soldiers with paper spears. His movements were bold, and his aura soared into the sky. It shook the hearts of people. The way he trained his soldiers showed his boldness and courage. 2 million soldiers were being trained at the same time, and the results of a night of hard work could be seen. This time, at least several thousand paramount gods had been recruited. They were either unaffiliated cultivators or members of mid-tier factions. They didn't have powerful sources of secret arts, nor were they able to buy better resources. Therefore, they could only join the army to gain more resources. Yi Qinghan ordered his men to occupy the Heavenly Gorge stronghold, then led his army back to Extreme Path City to rest. Standing on the city wall, he looked at Ji Gu, who was currently training his troops. He couldn't help but take a deep breath. As expected, there was always someone better than him. Just based on the imposing manner and boldness of his soldiers, he could tell that Ji Ji's attitude towards killing was even more ruthless than Zhu Wuxin's. His actions were decisive. On the battlefield, he was definitely a demon-like existence. Zhu Wuxin also stared fixedly at the army that covered the mountains and plains below the city walls. He looked at their arrangement and their movements. The army did not stick to the rules and did not completely follow Ling Yan's train of thought in the past. He mixed in too many of his own thoughts and ideas. He was bold and decisive, extracting the essence and discarding the dross. As long as the war continued for 30 to 50 years, causing the 9 lands to be in complete chaos, there was no doubt that Ji Gu would surpass his master Ling Yan. Compared to him, how do you feel about yourself? Yi Qinghan glanced at Zhu Wuxin and asked indifferently. My hands and feet are tied. I don't have enough boldness and my killing heart isn't strong enough. Zhu Wuxin was sincerely convinced. He didn't feel ashamed. Instead, he felt excited. Only with motivation could one improve. Yi Qinghan nodded and reminded him truthfully, your heart isn't ruthless enough. You don't have enough boldness. I suggest that if you have a goal in mind, even if there are mountains of blades and seas of fire ahead, even if you can kill more than half of your army, even if you can slaughter the common people, as long as you can complete the mission, you must unswervingly carry it out. Thank you for your reminder, Mr. Zhu Wuxin nodded firmly. A soldier must die on the battlefield. A general's success is built on the bones of thousands. If you can't do this, then don't talk nonsense about the military saints. No matter if it's Ling Yan or Yan Ao, as military saints, they all stepped on the corpses of their brothers to reach their current position, Yi Qinghan said indifferently. Zhu Wuxin was slowly transforming. His heart was also slowly solidifying. The will in his eyes soared to the heavens. Zhu Wuxin's heart was surging with battle intent. His heart was like a battlefield. The bigger the heart, the bigger the battlefield. Looking at the world, taking into account all the factors, using the same principle to deal with all changes. If he could completely annihilate the enemy, even if the mountains were covered with bones and seas of blood, he wouldn't hesitate. Only then could he be a military saint. Looking at Zhu Wuxin's transformation, Yi Qinghan's expression was somewhat complicated. He didn't know if he should nurture him or take the opportunity to kill him. You admire Mr. Yan Ao? Yi Qinghan stared at Zhu Wuxin and asked in a low voice. Yes. Mister, I have studied the classic battle between Mr. Yan Ao and Mr. Ling Yan since I was young. I respect him very much. Although he is from the Great Wasteland domain, a soldier is not guilty. Furthermore, he was defending himself and didn't take the initiative to invade. I feel that he is more worthy of respect than Mr. Ling Yan, Zhu Wuxin replied firmly. Yi Qinghan's brows twitched. He asked in a hoarse voice, if Yan Ao returns and raises his army to take revenge, unifying the 9 realms, there will no longer be any division between the 9 realms. Will you resist or support him? Zhu Wuxin stared blankly. His heart was in a mess. After a long time, he faintly sighed, Mr. Yan Ao is no longer here. If I can see Mr., I will definitely kneel down to become your disciple and follow you. You can become the new generation of Yan Ao. Although his physical body is dead, his soul is immortal. You are the inheritor of his soul. Yi Qinghan stared at Zhu Wuxin and said in a hoarse voice. Zhu Wuxin trembled and clenched his 10 fingers. Do you want to know about Yan Ao's past? Yi Qinghan looked at Zhu Wuxin's struggling heart and asked in a low voice. Zhu Wuxin looked expectantly at Yi Qinghan and curiously asked, You know about it? Yi Qinghan silently nodded. He stretched out his hand and grabbed 2 chairs. Sit down. Let's have a chat today. Zhu Wuxin was like a curious baby. He was like a well-behaved student who had a strong thirst for knowledge. He sat in front of Yi Qinghan and looked expectantly at Yi Qinghan. Yi Qinghan slowly sat down. He looked at the twinkling stars in the sky and seemed to have sunk into a deep thought. He said in a hoarse voice, Yan Ao was born in an ordinary scholarly family. He wholeheartedly read the books of the sages and was unwilling to kill an ant. Back then, when the imperial court of the Great Wasteland domain was selecting civil officials, they had to pass a written exam and obtain the approval of the Great Wasteland's father to become a noble. Back then, Yan Ao obtained first place in the written exam and went to the Great Wasteland Palace to meet the Great Wasteland's father. When he first saw the Great Wasteland's father, he was very surprised. He seemed to think that the Great Wasteland's father was a benevolent old man. He did not expect that the Great Wasteland's father was a resolute young man. His eyes were very cold and emotionless. However, the things he did were very gentle and treated his people well. At that time, he did not understand the Great Wasteland's master and wanted to leave the Great Wasteland Palace to find his own life. Do you know what the Great Wasteland's master did? Yi Qinghan looked at Zhu Wuxin's intoxicated expression and asked with a faint smile. What did he do? Zhu Wuxin seemed to have seen the scene from back then and immediately asked. Chapter 1390. The army on the city wall seemed to treat Yi Qinghan as a storyteller. One after another, they surrounded Yi Qinghan. Some of them were half kneeling, some of them were sitting down. All of them were obediently listening. Yi Qinghan did not disperse them. Instead, he pondered and said, back then, when the master of the great wilderness looked at Yan Ao's written exam, his words were majestic and ambitious. Although it was just a written exam, he had the imposing manner of a soldier on a punitive expedition. With a wave of his hand, he mobilized tens of thousands of troops. With a single sentence, he had the momentum of breaking through heaven's secrets. The only thing he lacked was a bit of ruthlessness. When he looked at the cultured and refined Yan Ao, his eyes were filled with admiration. He hoped that he could keep Yan Ao in order to obtain benefits for the people of the great wilderness. However, Yan Ao did not seem to want to stay. He could only bring Yan Ao to the most barren land of the great wilderness. The great wilderness. It's a place that people yearn for. It's beautiful, full of spiritual energy, beautiful mountains and limpid waters. The people there are kind and talented. Everything started from the great wilderness. People are born with a kind nature, which is a portrayal of the great wilderness. They are not as evil as the legends of the seven realms say. It's only because they are too powerful that they threaten the rule of some people. They are innocent, maybe they have different bloodlines, maybe they have different beliefs, but the great wilderness was not hostile to the other seven realms in the beginning. Just like the Chaos Realm, they wanted to take care of the weak, but they underestimated the jealousy of the people of the world. Yi Qinghan looked up to the sky and whispered. His voice was hoarse and deep. It was very magnetic. What he said was completely different from what the Snow Realm army had been taught. However, no one refuted him. They seemed to believe him without a doubt and were looking forward to what he would say next. Yi Qinghan seemed to feel that he had digressed from the topic. After a moment of silence, he whispered again, the master of the great wilderness took Yan Ao and left the great wilderness realm. He brought them to the other 8 realms, including the weakest primal chaos realm. He let him see the difficulties of the people of the world. He hoped that Yan Ao could stay and help the great wilderness and its people. Yan Ao wavered and chose to stay. However, what he did was not write a declaration of war with a red brush in his hand, nor did he write a memorial. The master of the great wilderness sent Yan Ao to the great wilderness Yellow Sand Army and started as a military advisor of 10,000 men. However, Yan Ao was too soft-hearted and would vomit even when he saw blood and bones. He was unwilling to stay in the army anymore. The blood covered his peerless eyes and sealed his bold and unrestrained heart. From then on, he was unable to recover from the setback. The master of the great wilderness agreed. However, he asked him to fight until the end of the war. That was the Battle of Pride. The opponent of that battle was not an outsider, but the master of the great wilderness. He hid his identity and personally led 30,000 slaves to surround the army that Yan Ao was in at the great wilderness realm's boundary river. He arranged the soldiers in a battle formation. Just like Mr. Jigu, he did not give Yan Ao the slightest chance. As long as Yan Ao was defeated or retreated, the hundreds of thousands of villagers behind him would die. Although the battle seemed hopeless, as long as Yan Ao was willing to open the boundary river's boundary river and use the river water to wash away the 30,000 enemy troops, he would be able to save the hundreds of thousands of villagers behind him. The master of the great wilderness forced Yan Ao to be ruthless. He also told him that if he killed the 30,000 soldiers, he would be able to save the hundreds of thousands of villagers behind him. Although war is killing, it is also protecting. Only then can the world be at peace. However, Yan Ao disappointed the master of the great wilderness. He did not choose to open the boundary river's boundary river. Instead, he chose to take the risk and used 10,000 soldiers to cover the hundreds of thousands of civilians as they retreated. The master of the great wilderness was very angry. He led his army and slaughtered the hundreds of thousands of civilians. Blood flowed like a river. Even the boundary river was dyed red. Everyone held their breath. Even Zhu Wuxin's pupils contracted. He did not expect the master of the great wilderness to be so cruel. Yi Qinghan grinned. His smile was filled with bitterness and sorrow. He said with a hoarse voice, "The master of the great wilderness is very cruel and brutal, isn't he?" Zhu Wuxin and the rest of the Snow Realm army could not help but nod their heads. Indeed, the master of the great wilderness is very cruel and brutal. He massacred hundreds of thousands of civilians, killed the 10,000 soldiers under Yan Ao's command, humiliated the corpses of the captains of his legion, humiliated the corpses of the civilians and the soldiers. However, he did not kill Yan Ao. He forced him to kneel on the ground and looked on helplessly as the army humiliated the civilians and humiliated the corpses of the soldiers. The master of the great wilderness hid in the rear and looked on as the slave army humiliated the civilians of the great wilderness. He hid in a corner and wept bitterly. However, when he saw Yan Ao's furious eyes, he did not regret it in the slightest. Now, in order to stimulate Yan Ao's fighting spirit and nurture his temperament, he killed so many civilians. However, if Yan Ao can become a military saint, he will be able to save hundreds of millions of people. Yan Ao returned to the Grand Desolation Palace like an evil ghost. Before he could say anything, the master of the Grand Desolation Palace expelled him from the army. He knelt in front of the Grand Desolation Palace and begged for 3 months, hoping that the master of the Grand Desolation Palace would give him another chance. He hoped that he could use his entire life to atone for his crime and benefit the Grand Desolation Palace. Zhou Shui, Mr. Yan Ao was not as good as you at that time. He was more soft-hearted and his words were bold and unrestrained. However, when he did things, he was unable to let go. Because of this incident, his heart and spirit fused together. Like the tip of his pen, he became the military saint of the Grand Desolation Palace. When everyone heard this, they felt as if they had seen Yan Ao's transformation. They wished that they could also transform to that extent. Mr., are you very familiar with Mr. Yan Ao? Can you tell us more about him? Zhu Wuxin asked expectantly. Yi Qinghan's narration was like a storyteller. His voice was hoarse and sharp. His words were filled with temptation. The snow border army on the city wall were entranced by his narration. Their minds rippled as they wished to hear more stories about Yan Ao. Perhaps, they even wished to hear more stories about Yan Ao. Yi Qinghan faintly smiled. Looking at the red clouds on the horizon, it was as if he could see the scene of Yan Ao's last battle. His blood dyed the battlefield and he didn't retreat even in the face of death. His smile was filled with bitterness and sadness, causing the tip of people's nose to turn sour. Yan Ao, he was a legend. If his cultivation was high enough, he would have been an existence that surpassed the master of the wasteland. Unfortunately, he died at such a young age. The heavens were jealous of heroic geniuses. Perhaps it's just him. Yan Ao fought thousands of small battles in his life, which laid the foundation for him to become the commander-in-chief of the Great Wasteland Army. From the position of a small army's military advisor, he climbed all the way to the position of the commander-in-chief of the Great Wasteland Army. He transformed from a soft-hearted scholar to a resolute and ruthless soldier in a short span of 10,000 years. 10,000 years, to us, it might be the time for seclusion, but it was his glorious life. I admire him very much and respect him very much. It's a pity that I won't be able to see him. Otherwise, I would definitely invite him for a drink. Yi Qinghan faintly said. In the past, he was inferior to all of you, and even more inferior to the commander-in-chief. What he could do, all of you can do the same. When all of you have feelings in your heart, you can kill millions of people. When your goal is to save millions of people, all of you will be the next Yan Ao, the saints of the military. Yi Qinghan's words were sonorous and forceful. His words shook everyone's heart. However, he didn't know that his words tonight would turn the several thousand people on the city wall into the main force of the Snow Realm Army in the future. All of them would become the backbone of the captains and even the commander-in-chief. They would contribute an indelible strength to the unification of the 9 realms in the future. Everyone still wanted to continue, but the sky was already bright. A group of people appeared outside the city wall. They were holding an imperial edict in their hands and were heading straight for Extreme Path City. Thank you to Piao Hong of Sai Song and Flourish of the World for your tips. Thank you to everyone for your recent tips and subscriptions. Especially the next chapter. Chapter 1391. A group of men and horses appeared below the city wall. They were very fast, and the leader was a bodyguard of the 9th prince. His cultivation was not bad, and he was a supreme god called Xuelong. Yi Qinghan had seen him a few times before. Xuelong was very respectful of Yi Qinghan. He got off his horse and walked to the city wall. He ran to the top of the city wall and bowed. Left Marshal, Emperor Shui Yan of the royal family has come out of seclusion. He knows that you have an extreme Dao pseudo-world artifact and asked His Majesty to give you two as tribute. His Majesty does not dare to disobey, so he asked me to inform you. Yi Qinghan frowned. He was very angry. The front line was fighting to the death. This Emperor Shui Yan was too shameless. He actually wanted to take away two pseudo-world weapons. Not to mention that they were in a war, even in peacetime, they would not give their pseudo-world weapons to others. Zhu Wuxin was also very angry. This kind of request actually came from the royal family's clan elder. Go back and tell him that the army cannot leave the pseudo-world artifact for now. If he needs the pseudo-world artifact, then use the royal family's treasure. This pseudo-world artifact is my personal weapon, and I will not give it to anyone. Yi Qinghan replied coldly. Shui Long's expression was awkward. He did not dare to offend Yi Qinghan, so naturally, he could not pass on Yi Qinghan's words to Emperor Shui Yan. He could only smile bitterly and leave. He organized his words and told Emperor Shui Yan to give up. After rejecting Emperor Shui Yan's request, Ji Gu defeated the extreme martial army's attack. They lost a lot of new soldiers, but their cooperation was getting better and better. After that, the army set out to conquer the central province. They took down a dozen small cities and started to attack the central city. They were stopped by the dragon army led by Long Ziyue. They lost a lot of soldiers, but the central city also suffered heavy losses. The city walls were about to be broken. However, Long Ziyue, the Sky Martial Sovereign and Sun Yan moved all of their troops to the central continent. Although they lost a lot of troops, their foundation was not damaged. Nearly 3 million troops formed a crescent shape and surrounded the Snow World Army. They wanted to force the Snow World Army out of the ultimate martial realm. Even Zhu Wuxin and Yi Qinghan took the initiative to cooperate. They controlled the left and right flanks of the army to stop the three armies from completely surrounding the Snow Jia army. The 6 marshals gathered in the central prefecture were definitely elites. They would definitely not be easy to fight. Both sides would suffer losses. The reinforcements of the Snow Border Army had not arrived yet. Ji Gu was somewhat impatient. He sent out more than 10 orders in a row, requesting the reinforcements in the rear to speed up the process and provide more soldiers and resources. However, what he received was not reinforcements. Instead, it was an order from Emperor Shui Yan. He demanded that commanders would deliver the 2 extreme pseudo-world weapons from Gu Qingyu and Little Yu back to Holy City. Furthermore, Emperor Shui Yan cut off the supplies and personally guarded the border. Even Emperor Shui Jiuhuang did not have the qualifications to mobilize the Snow World Army to threaten Yi Qinghan. Yi Qinghan clenched his fist and roared hoarsely, "Motherfucker, this idiot was actually an emperor." Was his brain crushed by a door? In order to get the pseudo-world weapons, he actually ignored the big picture. Only now did Ji Gu understand why the reinforcements and supplies had not arrived. It turned out that the Snow Fire Emperor wanted to take away the 2 great pseudo-world weapons. There was no need to say how powerful these pseudo-world weapons were during the war. If it was not for the 5 great pseudo-world weapons, how could the 3 million recruits and the 300,000 Snow Realm soldiers that he led resist the 3 great trump cards of the ultimate martial realm? Ji Gu looked at the confidant sent by Emperor Shui Yan acting so arrogant. He slapped him and pointed at the middle-aged man's nose and scolded, "Motherfucker, I am fighting at the front lines. It's fine if Emperor Shui Yan does not support me, but he actually dares to drag me down. Go back and tell him that if he wants the pseudo-world weapons, tell him to personally come to the front lines and ask me for them. If he does not dare to come, then tell him to scram. If he dares to cut off the supplies of resources and soldiers again, I will go back and kill him." That middle-aged man covered his face and looked at Ji Gu angrily. He did not expect him to be so overbearing and crazy. There was some disbelief in his eyes, but he did not realize that the cold light in Yi Qinghan's eyes had already condensed into substance. Scram! If I do not see the supplies of resources and soldiers in 5 days, I will show you. Ji Gu was not polite and did not give Emperor Shui Yan any face. So what if Emperor Shui Yan's status was high? In terms of seniority, only the Realm Lord and a few supreme clan elders were higher in seniority than him. This was because Ling Yan and the Realm Lord were brothers. The middle-aged man representing Emperor Shui Yan was incomparably angry, but he did not dare to say anything. Otherwise, Ji Gu would throw him to the front lines. For the time being, there was no supply of soldiers and supplies. Ji Gu, Yi Qinghan and Zhu Wu Xian discussed for a while. They had no choice but to withdraw the army and hand over the cities that they had previously conquered. They temporarily retreated to the Tong Tian Gorge and used the natural barrier as a defensive point to temporarily maintain their advantage. In the desolate border city, Emperor Shui Yan was even more furious. This was because the middle-aged man had exaggerated the words of Ji Gu and Yi Qinghan by several times for Emperor Shui Yan to hear. Arrogant brat! If it wasn't for Mr. Ling Yan's face, this emperor would have already killed you. Now you dare to insult this emperor's dignity like this. Since you want resources and military supplies, this emperor will let you completely give up on this idea. Emperor Shui Jiuhuang's eyes flashed coldly as he shouted, "Men, seal the border city's border river. Do not allow a single soldier to enter the Snow Empire's divine realm, old ancestor, you cannot." I will not agree. Right now, I am the commander of the Snow Empire's army. If you want to seize power, you have to at least go through the clan elders and take away my right to command. Emperor Shui Jiuhuang was somewhat angry. He did not expect Emperor Shui Yan to become more muddle-headed as he grew older. For the pseudo-world artifact, in order to enter the danger zone to find a stronger life saint medicine, he did not hesitate to give up Ji Gu and Zhu Wu Xian, this kind of military sage. He even killed the commander of the Snow Empire's army, the assistant minister Zhou Shui. You unfilial son! They dare to insult me like this. You actually want to speak up for them? Emperor Shui Yan sternly reprimanded. Murderous intent filled the border city. Nearly 10 million soldiers had been recruited and trained for more than 10 days. Although they were not as strong as a regular army, their cultivation was strong and they could come to the rescue at any time. However, they were blocked outside the city and could not enter, let alone cross the border river. They were very anxious, but they did not dare to offend Emperor Shui Yan and could only wait patiently. Emperor Shui Jiuhuang did not budge an inch. He did not agree to seal the border because that was equivalent to giving up 3 million soldiers, 3 military sages, and 5 extreme pseudo-world artifacts. Old ancestor, Zhou Shui definitely did not mean to blaspheme the imperial family's prestige. Right now, the front line is very tight and the pseudo-world artifact is very important. It can be used as an independent army. Naturally, he would not give it to you right now. However, once the war is over, he will naturally satisfy you. Why are you in such a hurry? Emperor Shui Jiuhuang earnestly advised. However, Emperor Shui Yan could not wait anymore because his life could not wait that long. Chapter 1392. Snowfire Emperor was once injured, and his lifespan was not that long. He often had to go to some dangerous places to find divine medicine to prolong his life, but some places were not that easy to enter, and it was not easy to come out either. Divine Nation did have a pseudo-world artifact, but it needed to be kept in a clan as a clan protection treasure. Without the clan elder's permission, he could not use it. He did not care about the death of the Snow Realm army. Now, he only wanted to obtain 2 pseudo-world artifacts and enter some dangerous places he had never entered before to take away the powerful divine medicine to prolong his life. In the end, the border was completely sealed, and even Snow 9 Emperor could not stop them. With the border sealed, Yi Qinghan, Ji Gu, and the others were completely furious. This was not just a hindrance, it was a hindrance to their waste. This was forcing them to their deaths. The matter of the border being sealed was quickly investigated by Marshal Saint Sky and the others. They immediately laughed. Snow Nation and Divine Realm were not as united as one. Sun Yang, Marshal Saint Sky, and Long Ziyue mobilized close to 10 million ordinary soldiers from the Wuji army. They wanted to completely defeat the Snow Realm army led by Yi Qinghan and Ji Go between Tong Tian Gorge and Extreme Dao City. Looking at the earth-shaking army, Yi Qinghan, Ji Go, and Zhu Wuxin sat in the main hall with heavy expressions. Without soldiers and resources, they were fighting alone in the extreme martial realm. Even with the pseudo-world artifact, they were powerless and could easily be wiped out by the army. Build ships, disguise as the Wuji army, cross the Wuji River, and ambush the true martial realm. Let the true martial realm army come to support us. Yi Qinghan thought for a moment and said. After the two battles at the Sky-Connecting Gorge and the one at the Desolate City, they had captured a total of 200,000 soldiers, including 50,000 soldiers from the Heavenly Martial Army, 120,000 soldiers from the Wuji Army, and 50,000 soldiers from the Dragon God Army. Yi Qinghan had unified the restrictive seal and conscripted 200,000 ordinary soldiers. They were dressed in the armor of the Wuji army and were cutting down giant trees beside the Wuji River. They were madly building large ships while Zhang Gu was defending the southern region of Extreme Dao City. He was bold in his actions, and his disposition of troops was superior to Zhu Wuxin's. He could obstruct the enemy on a large scale while Zhu Wuxin could defend the Sky-Connecting Gorge. He could delay the enemy for at least 10 days. Yi Qinghan found Lu Zhantian and had him lead this army. The final outcome of this army was that not a single one of them would survive. Only Lu Zhantian would be able to leave the battlefield safely. Yi Qinghan spread out the map and explained the plan in detail. He pointed to the vicinity of Extreme Dao City and said, "You delay for 15 days while Brother Lu and I lead the army to ambush the true martial realm. In the end, we will give up half of the army and flee back to the border of the ultimate martial realm. Presumably, the true martial realm will lead the army to chase after us. At that time, you will immediately retreat to Extreme Dao City and give the other cities and the border of the Wuji River to the ultimate martial realm's army. Let them besiege you, and I will retreat to 300 li outside of Extreme Dao City. When I get close to the ultimate martial realm's army, I will change direction and lead the remaining troops to fight the true martial realm's army to the death." Zhang Gu nodded in agreement with the plan, but the timing had to be precise. Otherwise, it would not be the true martial realm joining hands to besiege the ultimate martial realm, but the true martial realm and the ultimate martial realm joining hands to besiege them. Let's discuss the time and follow the plan step by step. We cannot make a single mistake. No matter how much we lose, we must attack or retreat according to the precise time. The three of them memorized the plan by heart. After the plan was completed, the 200,000 slave soldiers and 200,000 ordinary soldiers had already built 10 large ships. Each ship could hold 40 to 50,000 soldiers, which was enough to transport these 400,000 soldiers to the true martial realm. Lu Zhantian commanded the army, and Yi Qinghan disguised himself as an ordinary soldier to follow Lu Zhantian. One day later, the army had already set off. These 400,000 soldiers would certainly not return. If they did not give up these 400,000 people, the remaining 2 million soldiers would undoubtedly die. They could either compromise with Emperor Shuiyan, admit their guilt, and offer up the pseudo-world weapon. However, it was impossible for Yi Qinghan to give up the pseudo-world weapon. He could only take the risk, and it just so happened that he could drag the true martial realm down with him. Just like what Yi Qinghan had said last night, if one had feelings, but was able to step on the bones of hundreds of thousands or even millions of brothers to save more people, he could be the next military saint. Although Yi Qinghan mainly focused on individual combat power, his ability to lead an army was definitely not inferior to Ji Gu and Zhu Wuxin, because his state of mind was there. The 400,000 soldiers were promised that as long as they survived this battle, the slave soldiers could leave, and they could also formally follow him. As for the ordinary soldiers of the snow country, they could obtain the profound knowledge of the supreme divine technique. They did not know that they had been abandoned, and some people were destined to have a tragic ending. Hua hua hua. At night, the Wuxia River was swaying with starlight. The Wuxia River was 3,000 miles wide, and the 30-meter-high fog above was the forbidden area. It was very dangerous on the river. Normally, the fog would be blown away by the wind, and it would easily fall to the lower level. That kind of poisonous gas was the nemesis of the giant gods, and even the supreme gods would be deeply affected by it. The 10 ships moved forward quickly, and the soldiers on the ship sat cross-legged. No one made a sound, and they just waited quietly. Yi Qinghan looked at the sky. The fog was boundless, and only a little starlight and moonlight shone down. There were some special fish in the river, and their meat was as tough as steel. They were huge, and they constantly rammed into the ships. Their fangs pierced through the outer layer of the ships, and the ships shook violently. "Throw the prepared flesh into the water," Lu Zhantian said in a deep voice. Swish swish swish. The army stood up and threw all the corpses they had prepared into the water. Splash. Caw caw caw. Hiss hiss hiss. All kinds of tearing sounds and slapping sounds on the water were ear-splitting. The water splashed everywhere, and the army immediately released their divine power, forming a knot. Looking at the river surface, they saw countless carnivorous fish swimming from the bottom of the river, fighting for the corpses. Their fangs were as sharp as steel swords, and they were very sharp. Continue throwing. Boom boom boom. The army quickly threw large amounts of flesh into the water, attracting more and more carnivorous fish. Swish swish swish. Thousands of carnivorous fish were as big as humans, and when they jumped out from the water, they were actually 10 feet tall. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. Yi Qinghan took out a sharp sword and pierced through the steel-like fish. Blood poured out, and the fish became even more restless. It was as if the river was overturning the sea, and it was incomparably terrifying. The water turned red, and the fish began to attack each other. The ship safely sailed through this terrifying area. The army's hair stood on end, and his body trembled slightly. He looked back at the crazy area in the distance, and the river surged more than 10 feet tall. There was fear in his eyes. Would it be so easy to return? Once they fell into the water, it would be strange if they were not swallowed whole. Where does this Wuxia River lead to? How can such a strange fish live here? Lu Zhantian asked in surprise. Yi Qinghan lowered his voice and said, "This river leads to the Torn Impasse, and also to the Eastern Divine Sea. There are many strange creatures here, and they are very powerful. That's why this place is undefended all year round. Even the true force domain doesn't have a border army. We can drive straight in, and when we return, we can attack from the border passage." At this moment, the speed of the water in front of them was obviously different. It was as if the sea was surging, and a giant beast had appeared from the bottom of the water. Yi Qinghan's pupils constricted. He turned the bracelet into a huge crossbow and aimed at the bottom of the water. Chapter 1393. Yi Qinghan focused his gaze as he looked at the undulations in the depths of the river. Black shadows surged under the water as the opening crossbow in his hand was fully loaded. "Everyone, activate your godly power and set up a barrier. Do not let the ship break." Hua! The godly light enveloped the ship but could not tear apart the fog in the sky. The center of the Wuxia River was as bright as the sun. Hiss! The space was unstable and slightly distorted. The crossbow was aimed at the water surface as a beam of light shot out from his eyes. It was extremely frightening. The stalwart body was slightly distorted. Under everyone's gaze, the crossbow was almost torn apart. The army felt the danger and the ship swayed faster and faster. One could imagine how huge the demonic beasts in the river were. The army was filled with fear because the river was too dangerous. There was no chance of survival if one fell into it. One would die without a doubt. One would either be poisoned to death or devoured by countless carnivorous fishes. The army looked at Yi Qinghan in fear, especially the ordinary soldiers of the snow country. Most of them came here because of the name Zhou Shuai and revered him. They felt that Zhou Shuai was omnipotent and that he was the only one who could save the army. Whoosh! Just as everyone was panicking, Yi Qinghan released the arrow in his hand. The sharp arrow broke through the shackles and directly smashed into the water. Boom! Hua! The crossbow bolts broke through the surface of the water, creating huge waves that were tens of thousands of feet high. The ships were pushed back by the waves. Roar! Ao! A giant beast rushed out from the water. It was 100 feet tall and 1,000 feet long. It had a huge tail and a long neck. It weighed 100 tons and its body was like an uneven mountain. There were a few bony protrusions on its back. It was extremely cold and looked like a saber-toothed dragon, but it was more than 10 times larger. When it stood up, it was more than 30 meters tall. However, the fog above did not affect it at all. This beast was definitely not a native of the Wuxia River. It either tore through the danger zone or came from the depths of the sea. Hiss hiss hiss. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air as they looked up at the behemoth in horror. There was a sense of hopelessness in their hearts, as Yi Qinghan's ballista bolts had struck the behemoth's body, but they had only created sparks from the friction and then disappeared. The behemoth's external defenses were simply too strong. Even the over-gods were unable to harm it, let alone the giant gods. The soldiers on the ship were even more useless because they were unable to deploy their troops. This is a bone-sword colossal dragon. Yi Qinghan took a deep breath. He did not expect to encounter such a tough nut to crack in such a small place. Everyone, move back 3 kilometers and maintain a safe distance. After Yi Qinghan finished speaking in a low voice, he tapped the ground with the tip of his foot and leaped into the air. The tip of his foot seemed to be stepping on the surface of the lake, but in reality, he was only a few centimeters off the surface. Whoosh! Whoosh! Roar! The bone-sword dragon roared angrily, stirring up a huge wave. Standing in front of Yi Qinghan, it was like a giant, and Yi Qinghan was like a tiny dot. There was no comparison at all. Roar! Yi Qinghan transformed his crossbow back into the 7-foot heavy berserker and leaped into the air. He maintained a certain distance from the mist and stared at the colossal beast. Most of the colossal beast's body was still submerged in the water, with only its long neck and back exposed. Its huge eyes stared fixedly at Yi Qinghan, seemingly curious as to why this tiny dot dared to face it head-on. Roar! The colossal beast stretched out its head and roared, stirring up a bloody storm and causing the divine robes to flap loudly. The 10 warships quickly retreated. Otherwise, they would easily capsize, and the hundreds of thousands of soldiers would be buried here. Swish! Yi Qinghan gripped the hilt of his saber with both hands and pointed it at the colossal beast. His cold aura was oppressive, carrying with it a sharp destructive power to intimidate the colossal beast, hoping that it would leave on its own. However, the colossal beast's eyes were filled with disdain, as if it was looking at an ant. It fiercely shook its head and used the steel needle-like bone spikes on its head to attack Yi Qinghan. Boom! Yi Qinghan slashed out with his saber, the veins all over his body bulging as he slammed into the bone spikes with lightning speed. Boom! The bone spikes were forcefully broken, and the blade collided with the colossal beast's neck. Like the friction between steel and steel, the sound produced was extremely ear-piercing, and sparks flew in all directions. The two boundless forces collided, causing the surrounding fog to surge in all directions. Roar! The colossal bone sword dragon's head suffered a huge impact and was thrown back violently. It crashed into the water, causing a curtain of water to splash up as it slid several hundred meters under the water. Yi Qinghan's figure hurriedly retreated, his body twisting and staggering. For a short period of time, he was unable to control his body and could only fly backwards to reduce the impact. Swish! 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 Yi Qinghan stepped on the surface of the water like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water. He retreated all the way until he reached the warship, where he barely managed to stabilize his body. Phew! Yi Qinghan exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. His right hand trembled as he spread out his 5 fingers and circled them. He once again gripped the hilt of his saber and charged out once more, sending out thousands of attacks in a row. The saber radiance shot out in all directions, cutting through the curtain of water. It seemed like there was no order to it, but in reality, his attacks were ruthless and merciless. He wanted to force the colossal beast to retreat. The colossal beast's body was huge and its defense was terrifying, but that did not mean that it did not feel pain. Yi Qinghan's strength was even more terrifying. A single slash might not be a threat, but if thousands of slashes landed on a single spot, even the strongest defense would collapse. Swish! 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 Yi Qinghan attacked like a madman, specifically targeting the colossal beast's neck. Although the neck was as thick as a water bucket, it was definitely the weakest part of the colossal beast's body. After thousands of attacks, the colossal beast's eyes were filled with anger and panic. This was because there were already wounds on its neck, and it could be chopped off by Yi Qinghan at any time. Roar! The colossal beast roared and moved its body, wanting to send Yi Qinghan flying. However, he was as fast as lightning, shuttling through the gaps between its attacks. The colossal beast could not do anything to him. The army was dumbfounded as they watched the attack miss by a hair's breadth. They were all sweating for him and could only secretly pray that Yi Qinghan could win. Swish! 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 Yi Qinghan soared into the sky and shuttled through the mist less than half a meter away. His blade soared through the air and once again slashed towards the colossal beast's neck. The colossal beast retracted its head, unable to bear Yi Qinghan's attacks. Yi Qinghan was too small for it, like a cannon hitting a mosquito. It could not hit him at all. In the end, it could only retreat back into the water and escape towards the depths of the sea. Hua! The army cheered loudly, incomparably excited. They seemed to have regarded Yi Qinghan as a true supreme god. However, they did not know that the person they worshipped was leading them to their deaths. Continue moving. Yi Qinghan returned to the ship expressionlessly. His arms were sore and powerless, and his entire body felt as if it had been hollowed out. No one knew how much divine power and physical strength he had used to achieve this seemingly easy victory. He looked at Lu Zhantian and said in a deep voice, "Be careful. The creatures here are very dangerous, and they are all carnivorous." However, after this battle, the colossal beasts did not dare to approach. The ship quickly approached the opposite shore, and the forest on the other side was clearly visible. Chapter 1394. Forests, high mountains, misty clouds, and overgrown thistles and thorns. It was not a place suitable for humans to live in. No wonder they did not use the border guards. Hua! The ship approached the shore, and the rocks on both sides of the ship could not be climbed. They were almost vertical, and only a small part of the ship was sloping. There were also overgrown weeds that contained many poisonous creatures. Yi Qinghan's eyes narrowed as he stared at one of the slopes. The peak was not high, but after releasing his divine sense, he discovered that there was a mountain path after this peak. Although it was not wide, it was enough for the army to move through. Shua! Yi Qinghan leapt up, and a sharp sword appeared in his hand. He accurately struck out a few hundred times, and the sword light tore apart the mountain peak and shot into the weeds, killing all the poisonous creatures that could threaten the army. He then stirred up the mist halfway up the mountain and led it away from the peak. Abandoned ship, advance. Yi Qinghan walked at the front and ordered the army to move forward quickly. The army of 500,000 quickly advanced to the opposite side of the mountain peak. They looked at the small path that was less than 10 meters wide. It was rugged and winding, and there were precipitous cliffs. The slightest carelessness would cause them to fall to the bottom of the cliff. 5 people in a row, form a column. Military orders were like mountains. Although the path was difficult, no one hesitated and formed a long line. The army moved through the depths of the hills. There were no signs of human habitation, and even adventurers were rare. Powerful vicious creatures were hiding in the distance, and their green eyes were especially dazzling in the night. However, they were afraid of the army and did not dare to charge over. Once a beast tide formed, Yi Qinghan would not be able to reverse the situation. Lu Zhantian's face was grave as he looked around vigilantly, afraid of being attacked. Yi Qinghan was not too worried. His body emitted a faint dragon's aura, and it was very condensed. It was like an ancient dragon walking, intimidating other giant beasts. Boom! A few giant creatures were wriggling as if they wanted to flatten a mountain. Their huge bodies crushed the ancient trees as they pounced towards the army. Yi Qinghan surrounded the army to prevent the rear from not being able to take care of them. He could only let Lu Zhantian lead the way while he stopped and stood at the top of the mountain to look down and guard the entire mountain. The winding mountain path extended all the way down. As long as one went down the mountain, there would be a wide road at the foot of the mountain. One could enter the heart of the mountain and reach the heart of the mountain. Once one reached the heart of the mountain, one could enter the ancient forest. There were no weeds in the forest. One of the giant beasts could no longer hold back and finally launched an attack, pouncing towards the army halfway up the mountain. Roar! The wings on the back of the giant beast were 10 meters long. When it spread its wings, it could move mountains and shake trees. It was incomparably terrifying. When it opened its bloody mouth, it could swallow at least hundreds of people. The great army was shocked. They threw out the spears in their hands, but they couldn't even break through its fur. They couldn't help but be horrified. Yi Qinghan transformed into a sharp sword that pierced through the clouds and shot down from the giant beast's head. His sword momentum was like a rainbow. Boom! Pssh.howl. Boom boom. Yi Qinghan's sword pierced through the giant beast's head and came out from its lower jaw. The giant beast let out a blood-curdling scream as it lost all signs of life. Its corpse fell like a kite with its string cut. After a long time, it smashed into the bottom of the mountain, breaking countless ancient trees. Hiss! Dajuan was so shocked that his eyes went blank. He didn't know what to say. Swish! Yi Qinghan soared into the air and returned to his original position. He said in a low voice, "Continue on our way." Lu Zhantian saw this and couldn't help but sigh. The Yi Qinghan of the past had only been walking side by side with him. Now, he had already thrown him tens of thousands of miles away. His individual combat strength was inferior to his, and his leadership was inferior to his. The great army continued on their way. After Yi Qinghan killed the giant beast with one strike, the other giant beasts didn't dare to act recklessly. They steadily entered the main road below. Now that there was a main road, the great army sped up their progress. In one night, they entered the hinterland and actually discovered human adventurers. Moreover, their cultivation wasn't weak. Stop! Yi Qinghan's divine sense discovered the adventurers and immediately called for the great army to stop. What's wrong? Lu Zhantian asked curiously. There are quite a few adventurers. Their cultivation isn't weak, but they're scattered. The great army can't kill them. I'll go catch a giant beast and let it help us drive away this group of adventurers. Yi Qinghan left behind these words and returned to the depths alone. He caught a giant tiger beast and gave it a violent beating. It was so angry that it didn't dare to speak. It was as obedient as a kitten, allowing him to carry it back to the hinterland. Yi Qinghan threw it into the hinterland and said coldly, "Kill any humans you see. Don't leave a single one alive. If you dare to sneak away, I'll pluck all your tiger fur." The giant tiger beast flew into a rage out of humiliation, but it didn't dare to vent its anger on Yi Qinghan. It could only vent its anger on the other humans. This group of adventurers immediately exploded, causing the hinterland to be in chaos. The adventurers all fled to the periphery. Roar! A tiger's roar shook everyone, and no one dared to move. Especially the group of adventurers from the True Force domain. The strongest was only a giant god, but they were scattered. The great army could easily be discovered. With the giant tiger at the front, the great army rushed to the periphery unscrupulously. When they reached the periphery, even if the great army of the True Force domain discovered them, it would be impossible to block them in the mountains. Once they reached the plains, there was no border army nearby. Relying on the garrison of a city alone wouldn't have much of an impact. Yi Qinghan no longer cared. He led the great army to a city outside the mountains. Shaolin City was a city named after a powerhouse. Shaolin was the founder of this city. He was also a legend. He had a rather high status in the True Force domain. He held an important position in the imperial city and was deeply favored by the emperor. The Shao family was located here. The spiritual energy here was dense, and the mountains and rivers nourished people. It was a holy land. There were no enemies to harass them. Shaolin had placed his family here to reassure the royal family. Although this territory was good, it wasn't big. No matter how the Shao family developed, they wouldn't threaten the royal family. The Shao family had more than 30,000 direct descendants and more than 100,000 collateral descendants. This area was their territory, which was equivalent to a province. Shaolin City was the largest city in this area. There was a gate that led directly to the border of the Snow Country and the Divine World. Boom! The great army pressed on, and Shaolin City's expression changed. After all, there was no great army in the city. There were many women and children. They couldn't resist the great army at all. Shao Zun, the patriarch of the Shao family, was shocked. He came to the city wall and looked at the approaching great army. He asked sternly, "Where did this army come from?" Report. Patriarch, looking at their clothes, "It's the ultimate martial domain's ultimate martial domain's ultimate martial domain army. They should have come from the depths of the ancient forest. It's very likely that they came along the ultimate martial river." A scout immediately rushed over and said, "How many?" Shao Zun immediately asked. "About 500,000. It's equivalent to half of the ultimate martial domain army. We can't resist at all." The scout quickly replied. "Quick, ask for help. Inform the patriarch." Shao Zun was shocked. If they couldn't stop them, the Shao family would be finished. However, when the great army reached the outskirts of the city, they didn't attack. The direct descendants of the Shao family all aimed their realm-opening crossbows at the great army. Their eyes were filled with panic. Yi Qinghan whispered to Lu Zhantian, "Tell them that our target is the Snow Country and the Divine World. Tell them to open the city. Otherwise, we'll massacre everyone in the city." Shao Zun obviously didn't believe it. Naturally, he wouldn't open the city gates. He immediately said coldly, "The ultimate martial domain army's commander, come out and speak. We are the descendants of Shaolin. If you know what's good for you, leave immediately. Otherwise, when the patriarch arrives, none of you will live." Chapter 1395. From Xiao Zun's tone, Xiao Lin seemed to be an incredible person. However, Yi Qinghan didn't know him, nor had he heard of his name. Naturally, Lu Zhantian didn't know him either. He couldn't help but find a captain of the Martial Extreme Army and ask curiously, "Who is this Xiao Lin?" The captain of the Martial Extreme Army had been guarding the border all year round. It was impossible for him not to know the top figures of the true martial domain. After thinking for a moment, he immediately replied, "Sir, this Xiao Lin is a legendary expert. His cultivation has reached the limit of the supreme realm. He is the prime minister of the true martial dynasty. He once guarded the border and led troops to war. He definitely won't lose to the 10 great generals of the ultimate martial domain." Yi Qinghan was immediately happy. This relationship was good. If they destroyed Shaolin City, wouldn't Shaolin take revenge on the ultimate martial domain? Lu Zhantian and Yi Qinghan looked at each other and waved their hands. Attack the city. The first person to break the city will be rewarded with a supreme divine technique and a copy of the experience. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. When the army heard this, they first shot out tens of thousands of arrows. They covered the sky and the earth, suppressing the direct descendants of the Shao family on the city walls. Boom boom boom. Tens of thousands of arrows broke through the expert's defenses. More than 10 arrows pierced through the body of an expert, suppressing his vitality and soul. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers joined forces to attack a city without an army. Xiao Zun, a supreme god, was blasted off the city walls. He fell to the ground with several arrows stuck in his body. His expression was hideous. Ah! Screams echoed in the city. Blood flowed like a river. Some arrows pierced through more than 10 people's bodies and destroyed buildings. Boom! Whoosh whoosh whoosh. The army destroyed Shaolin City's resistance. Thousands of soldiers rammed into the city gates and directly smashed them open. Leave the strongest. Kill all the giant gods. As for the rest, cripple and humiliate them. Hang them on the city walls, Yi Qinghan ordered. Why not kill them all? Won't Shaolin be angrier? Lu Zhantian asked curiously. Yi Qinghan shrugged and smiled coldly. Keep them alive to deliver a message. With that, Yi Qinghan led his army into the city and ordered them to slaughter any experts they saw. He stepped on Xiao Zun's body and laughed wickedly. I gave you face, but you didn't take it. I was only planning to go to Snow Country and the God Realm to slaughter some people. I didn't expect you to deliver your face to me. Did you think that Shaolin's name would protect your Shao family? How laughable. We don't even put the Zhenwu dynasty in our eyes. Otherwise, why would we need to borrow this path? You bunch of thieves. Xiao Zun was furious as he watched the army slaughter. He was just about to curse when Yi Qinghan kicked him so hard that he almost choked. Bang! Yi Qinghan kicked him in the chest and said coldly, You brought this on yourselves. Tell Shaolin and the Zhenwu dynasty to mind their own business. Otherwise, I'll lead my army into your imperial city next time. With that, Yi Qinghan sealed Xiao Zun's cultivation and hung him on the city walls for the army to humiliate. He had to watch the army slaughter people and even humiliate women. Yi Qinghan narrowed his eyes and didn't say anything. This was the army's final glory. There was no harm in letting them enjoy it a little. It could be considered a consolation. When the army saw that Yi Qinghan didn't resist, they immediately burned, killed, and looted the city. They would do anything. This was the hatred and discrimination between realms. They didn't treat people from other realms as humans at all, just like the Great Wasteland domain in the past. It wasn't that Yi Qinghan was ruthless. He just wanted to anger the Zhenwu domain and Shaolin. Only when the Zhenwu domain participated in the battle could he achieve his goal. Soon, the army rushed to the ancestral land of the Shao family and started a massacre. Most of the giant gods were killed, and the others were either killed or injured. Xiao Lin Cheng was heavily injured. Yi Qinghan felt that it was about time. He led the army directly to the border of the Zhenwu domain through the space gate. The border army didn't expect an army from another realm to appear behind them. They were caught off guard. Yi Qinghan's army broke through their defenses with lightning speed. Tens of thousands of soldiers died on the spot. After killing the people of the Zhenwu domain, the army left and went straight to the Snow Country's divine world. The border of the Snow Country's divine world was controlled by the Snow Fire Emperor. The Snow Nine Emperor was suppressed and couldn't control the army. In order to obtain the pseudo-world weapon, the Snow Fire Emperor gathered most of his troops near the border city and sealed the passage to the ultimate martial world. Unless Yi Qinghan went to the passage and begged for mercy and offered the pseudo-world weapon, he couldn't open the passage. There weren't many guards at the border of the Zhenwu domain. Yi Qinghan forced his way into the Snow Country's divine world and swept through all the checkpoints. He went straight to the border city and wanted to break the seal of the border city and let the Snow Country's army that was trapped in the ultimate martial world retreat. The army of 500,000 quietly appeared in the border city. The border city was already broken and didn't have much defense. Now that it was attacked, a hole was opened on the spot. The army of 500,000 were death warriors. They didn't show any mercy. In addition, Yi Qinghan secretly transmitted his voice to some of the commanders of the Snow Country's army, telling them to move aside. At least half of the Snow Country's army were his own people. Naturally, they would listen to him. Not only did the people of the left marshal's mansion not stop the army, they even interfered with the army loyal to the Snow Fire Emperor. They interfered with each other, making Yi Qinghan and Lu Zhantian's army even more ferocious. The Snow Fire Emperor was furious. He roared, "Block them for me. You bunch of trash, how did you train your troops?" Looking at the chaos of the Snow Country's army, the Snow Fire Emperor was so angry that he almost vomited blood. The nearly 10 million new troops that Jigu ordered people to recruit were completely dumbfounded. They didn't know what to do. However, they seemed to want the seal to be broken so that they could rush over to save Jigu and the people of the left marshal's mansion. Therefore, they were all waiting for the result. The border city was in complete chaos. The army loyal to the left marshal's mansion was causing trouble. The people loyal to the Snow Fire Emperor wanted to attack, but they couldn't find a place to attack. The advantageous terrain was occupied by the people of the left marshal's mansion. However, they didn't attack. On the other hand, Yi Qinghan and Lu Zhantian led their army of 250,000 to attack. Damn it! A bunch of trash. The Snow Fire Emperor coldly looked at the chaotic army. He pulled out his sword and smashed it into the slave army behind Yi Qinghan. In a split second, he caused a lot of casualties. Roar! Yi Qinghan hid his original appearance. His bracelet turned into a heavy sword. He madly pounced at the Snow Fire Emperor. Every sword strike was as heavy as 1,000,000 jin. The Snow Fire Emperor's cultivation was strong, but his body was much weaker. After being attacked by Yi Qinghan, his blood and qi were surging. He didn't have much vitality left. After going all out, he seemed to have aged a few hundred years. Boom! With the cooperation of the Snow Country's army controlled by the left marshal's mansion, the seal on the border was broken. However, the army was surrounded by the Snow Country's army. The battle was very fierce. The 200,000 slave army suffered heavy casualties. The remaining 300,000 ordinary soldiers suffered heavy casualties. In the realm of true force, Shaolin learned that Shaolin City had been attacked by the people of the realm of true force and suffered heavy casualties. His direct descendants had almost been wiped out. Xiao Zun repeated Yi Qinghan's words to him. Shaolin vomited blood on the spot and asked the Emperor of the realm of true force to allow him to personally lead troops to the realm of true force to take revenge. Chapter 1396. In the true martial domain, Shaolin personally led the million-strong army to break through the defense of the Snow Country's divine domain. He rushed from the back of the Snow Country's divine domain's army, but when he reached the back of the border city, he was dumbfounded. The million-strong army looked at the 300,000 to 400,000 strong army rampaging inside the Snow Country's army. The Snow Country's army was in chaos, as if there was no commander controlling it. The 400,000 strong army was like an army of wolves and tigers, invincible. Yi Qinghan discovered the ultimate martial domain's army at the back, and immediately notified the people of the left martial residence to attack his own army. Retreat. Lu Zhantian saw the situation and prepared to lead the army to escape and leave the battlefield. Boom! Yi Qinghan, as the vanguard general, rushed forward and broke through the defense of the Snow Country's divine domain from the left wing of Shaolin's army. Shaolin was stunned for a while, then he roared, "Chase! Capture him alive!" At this moment, the Snow Flame Emperor was furious. He organized the backbone of the imperial family, a total of 800,000, and chased from the back. The three armies galloped, dust flew everywhere, their momentum was like a rainbow. The cities they passed were all closed, no one opened their doors, the border area was in chaos. Advance to the right wing. Break through the Snow Country's border army and enter the ultimate martial domain. Lu Zhantian pointed to the right wing with his spear and ran. Now that he was sure that the true martial domain and the divine domain would blame this on the ultimate martial domain, as long as he could delay for half a month, the ultimate martial domain's army would completely surround the ultimate martial domain, and it would be a success. From now on, no one is allowed to reveal their identity. If you die in battle, I will avenge you in the future, and your descendants will get the credit. If anyone dares to talk nonsense and be a traitor, I will personally kill you. 9 generations will be implicated. Yi Qinghan roared in a low voice. His voice spread within the army, but it didn't spread to the outside. The army trembled, they knew that this was a disaster, but they believed that the left marshal, even if he died in battle, he wouldn't mistreat his family and descendants. The martial extreme army of the ultimate martial realm had been sealed by Yi Qinghan. Before they came, they knew that they were doomed. However, Yi Qinghan had already promised that their identities had been recorded. In the future, when they attacked the ultimate martial realm, their families would enjoy the treatment of the families of martyrs. Bestow upon the giant god a set of ultimate secret techniques and a certain amount of resources. Since they were going to die anyway, the captives of the Wuxia army, dragon god army, and heavenly martial army didn't think too much about it. They could only grit their teeth and endure. The army of 400,000 fled madly. Once they were left behind and were caught by Shaolinjun or the Snow Realm army, they would immediately self-detonate their bodies and souls, causing great losses to the two armies. Yi Qinghan and Lu Zhantian led the army in a circle, but their ultimate goal was still to get closer to the border of the ultimate martial realm, hoping to break through the defense and rush over. At this time, the two armies were even more convinced that this group was from the ultimate martial realm. They were extremely angry and chased after them relentlessly. Day after day passed. After a total of 8 days and 8 nights, the army of 400,000 was left with less than 150,000. The rest either died in battle or self-detonated. None of them chose to be a traitor. Although Yi Qinghan felt guilty, he was still firm in his belief that this time, he had to complete his goal. Snow Flame Emperor and Shaolin were also shocked. They didn't expect this ultimate martial realm army to be so terrifying. They would rather die than be captured. This kind of army was definitely the trump card of the trump card. They didn't understand why the ultimate martial realm would choose this kind of army as a suicide squad, taking a detour around the true martial realm and attacking the Snow Empire's divine realm. In the ultimate martial realm, millions of troops attacked the Snow Realm army from the Tongtian Gorge and the central continent at the same time. The battle was tragic. If it wasn't for Ji Gu and Zhu Wuxin personally guarding the two sides, they would have already been broken through. However, they still suffered heavy losses. In just 8 days, more than a third of the army died and another third of the army was injured. Hold on for 2 more days, retreat to the extreme Dao city. Ji Gu and Zhu Wuxin discussed for a moment and decided that this kind of battle was completely unbalanced. The gap was too big. Whether it was the number of people or the resources, they were not enough. If they continued to hold on, Yi Qinghan wouldn't be able to attract the reinforcements of the Two Realms army. There were less than 1,200,000 ordinary Snow Realm army left. They were all recruits recruited by Ji Gu. However, all of them were now a regular army with a dense murderous aura. Moreover, their aura was stronger than the ordinary army. They had the determination to die. Even if they were tired, even if they were still bleeding, they were still unwilling to give up. Their eyes were incomparably resolute. In the Tong Tian Gorge, relying on Tian Zhan, Zhu Wuxin led 30 personal guards and 300,000 ordinary recruits. Although the number was small, their losses were the least. This was because the 4 great pseudo-world weapons in the middle of the Tong Tian Gorge were equivalent to an army of 1 million. Moreover, there were so many people from the crazy sect at the front line. Blood flowed like a river and bones were everywhere. It was incomparably tragic. Both Zhu Wuxin and Ji Gu hated Emperor Shuayan bitterly. Now that the army wasn't left behind, they simply didn't know that the passage to the World River had been opened. Only a few 100,000 Snow Realm army and 10 million ordinary recruits were guarding the border of the World River. Otherwise, they would have definitely chosen to retreat. At the border, there were still some trusted subordinates of Emperor Shuayan guarding it. Although they couldn't completely seal it off, it was enough to block Ji's group. Once they were attacked from the front and the back, they would die even more miserably. Ji Gu didn't retreat and thus avoided a calamity. On the 10th day, the original army of 500,000 was reduced to less than 50,000. Moreover, most of them were injured and their eyes were lifeless. However, they were getting further and further away from the border. They couldn't help but feel despair. There were less than 10,000 captives and 40,000 new recruits left. At this moment, they ran into a mountain and engaged in guerrilla warfare with Shaolinjun and the Snow Realm army, hoping to delay a bit more time. At night, the army of less than 50,000 gathered together. At this moment, they seemed to have thought things through. They surrounded Yi Qinghan with faint smiles in their eyes. "Mister, to be able to fight such a battle with you, I am willing to die." A supreme god expert looked at Yi Qinghan with gratification and pride on his face. "Us too." The army nodded in agreement. They had created many miracles along the way. If it wasn't for Yi Qinghan leading the army, how could these 50,000 soldiers have survived until now? However, they didn't know that their lives were being used as cannon fodder by Yi Qinghan. The corner of Yi Qinghan's mouth twitched. He clenched his fist and smiled very miserably. If it wasn't for the fact that he didn't have absolute strength, why would he use 500,000 soldiers as bait and cannon fodder? "Brothers, I am sorry for all of you. However, I will definitely not let down your families. As long as I don't die, all of your names will be remembered in my heart." Yi Qinghan gazed all around. Looking at the pairs of eyes filled with expectation and reverence, he said in a low voice. "Now that you've said those words, we're willing to die." The Overgod spoke once more. "We are willing to be loyal to Mr. to the death." The army roared in a low voice. At this moment, the attitude of the less than 10,000 captives changed. They were no longer passively loyal. Instead, they were moved. Yi Qinghan didn't discriminate against them along the way. This was something that others could never do. "Tonight, we can fight to the death. I will take as many as I can with me. I won't leave a single one as a captive." Yi Qinghan stood up and looked at the stars. Calculating the time, he estimated that Ji Gu and the others wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer, you're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.